share my screen here. Get kind of official. All right. So let's let all I think it's a little slow in letting everybody in. So we'll give people a moment, all our attendees. All right, I think we've got our attendees in here. Oh, no, a few more.
Yeah.
All right. Well, welcome everyone. Let's get started. We're a couple minutes after the hour. We've got a lot to do today. This is the second meeting of the Nantucket Short-Term Rentals Work Group. And yeah, I was asked last time by participants, attendees, how many attendees we have present. So I just want to start off by saying it looks like right now we have 37 attendees, and we have our 17 panelists, which is consists of all of our work group members, work group alternates, staff, supporters, and facilitators who, yeah. So now, and I'll give you guys updates on the attendee numbers because I know people want to know. We're up to 40 now. So,
Stacey, sorry to interrupt. Yeah. All panelists should be able to see it. If you go to that bottom menu and you hit participants, you'll be able to see who's an attendee and who's a panelist.
Okay, great. So it's just the attendees who can't see it. Okay. Oh, that's not quite how I wanted this to. If I do that, does it now show up on your full screen?
Yes.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So today's meeting objectives, we're going to refine and confirm our policy goals for the process, otherwise known as the problem we are here to solve, problems. We're going to get an overview on short-term rental policy development process and initial information about data available from Granicus, who is our technical support on this issue. And that's really going to be the bulk of our meeting. And then we will, of course, I know there's a lot of issues to discuss around the operating protocols. So we will try to finalize those and discuss next steps. And of course, there will also be time for public comment. And we'll try to summarize action items before we close at 8 o'clock. Just to reiterate our Zoom norms, inviting our primary members to have your cameras on. If we can invite our staff and our alternates to just have your cameras off. That's really helpful, just so we can get a good gallery view of the primary members who are going to be most actively participating. And then, of course, staff, when you are asked a question or called on, to feel free to turn on your cameras. Mute when you're not speaking. Feel free to use the chat. This meeting is being recorded and will be posted for anybody to watch. And we will address Q&A. If the public would like to put questions into the Q&A, feel free to do so at any point. If it's an easy question for us to answer in the moment, we will do so. Otherwise, it will be addressed at the end of the meeting during public comment time. Peter.
Just a quick question.
Yeah.
I have a question I want to ask one of the members, because there was an article in the newspaper and I followed up on that article in the newspaper, and there's some questions about John Delano's background in terms of being on the committee. And do we want to hold that until later, or do we want to do that now?
I think if you want to ask him a question now, you're welcome to do so.
Okay. John, you there?
I am, Peter. I
Okay.
apologize again for my voice. As I said earlier, I was tested positive for COVID this morning, so I'm on Paxlovid, and one of the consequences of all of this
Nope.
is that my voice is terrible. So I apologize. I really do.
No problem. But my question is this: I read the article that was a letter to the editor in the paper last week. And I always really believe about a third of what I read. And I did my own research about your background and your participation in Nantucket Together. And it looks to me that as if your wife is on the advisory board of Nantucket Together, and you were until this afternoon, and all of a sudden your initials disappeared. And I'd like to get that some explanation to that, because I don't think it's proper for you to, if you are on the advisory board of Nantucket Together, for you to be in addition to Kathy on the committee.
Yeah. Well, I'm not on the advisory board. I haven't been on any board. I was supportive, and I disclosed all that in my application. And as you know, the select group, the select board, plus the other two nominated and voted for me 5-0. There was nothing hidden, nothing. I supported Nantucket Together when it was initially begun, because it was the group that stood up for those who are engaged in short-term rentals when there was an effort to discriminate against those who were non-voting taxpayers on the island. I've owned a home on the island since 1979. We've rented the home for parts of the summer every year since, and that's how we support it. But I was very clear about all of that in our disclosures. I think again,
John, if you say that you're not on the advisory board of the committee, it's fine. That's all you need to say. We don't have to go any further than
thank
that.
you, Peter, for asking. I did not see, I heard there was a letter to the editor. I didn't see it, so I can't speak to it, but I appreciate what you're saying. I identify, I know there were others who were on different boards who are not on it now. I think my colleague from the Monomoy area, and I would identify the same way. But thank you, Peter, for raising it. I appreciate the opportunity to clarify, even in my scratchy voice.
Great.
Thank you.
John?
Yeah, well, it's a follow-up question, I guess. And I already talked to Stacy a little bit about this, where, for me, the logic of a primary member and an alternate makes absolute, sense for named organizations. But for at-large members, where there are 3 of us that have absolutely no common, we don't discuss our views within ourselves or with John. So can I just be clear on, does John have, if something happens and I cannot make it, does John get to vote for me? Because if so, it seems kind of odd, because it doesn't follow the logic of named organizations. We may have completely different views on what's coming up that week. So
Yeah. So the decisions about the members and alternates was made by the framework committee and the selection committee. It is not under our auspices. And they defined that the alternate, the at-large alternate, and they selected John for that role, that his role is to vote in the absence of a member. I'd like, if we can, to hold this conversation till we get to the ground rules conversation, if there's more specific suggestions people have for what that might mean, just because I know that people are eager to hear about the issues, and as important as all of the process pieces of
Did Stacy freeze on us?
The one person who
I
shouldn't
think-
freeze. Oh
Oh,
no.
no.
Exactly.
Oh, now she's free.
She's back. Okay.
She's free.
Oh, sorry, did I freeze? All right, let me switch to my cell. Hang on a second. Hello, am I back? Am I
Yes.
back?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. All right. I connected to my Wi-Fi, so hopefully, I mean, my data. So hopefully that will carry me through. Sorry. So I was just asking if perhaps we could hold this topic until we get to the ground rules discussion, so that I know that we can get through the other key issues, if that is okay with everyone. Kathy,
Yes.
is your comment on that topic? Do you mind if we hold this topic until we get to the discussion about ground rules?
That's fine. I was just going to clarify the part that John, that was in the letter. I
Yeah.
just want to clarify that.
Okay,
I-
thanks.
As far as I'm concerned, I think we're fine. I don't think we have to talk about it anymore.
Okay, all right. Okay, so just going back to my slides here. All right, so ground rules. Now we have a more detailed set that I had shared with you all, but it hasn't been approved yet. So in the meantime, just to note tonight's ground rules, to please, again, be concise in your statements, to try to be constructive to the points that are being made, and always to please be respectful, and to not speak in a about any other member or really any other human beings in a manner that you would not yourself want to be spoken about. And I made this slide just to remind myself that we next needed to approve the meeting summary. So we did receive, I think, a few grammatical or small changes there, and some names being spelled incorrectly, which is, we truly apologize. That should not happen and won't happen again. So really sorry to both Julia and to Peter for that, for those name misspellings. Beyond that, though, just want to open it up. Any other comments people have about the meeting summary? And actually, I did want to just say, so you will, I'm sure, notice that this meeting summary looks a little bit different than your average, notes from municipal meetings. As we had said, we try to do them in a more readable fashion, so that the public is really, who doesn't attend these meetings, is still really able to follow along and know what's going on. We did do two different styles in this summary, in part because we wanted to get your feedback. So in the first and final discussions, we did a more traditional bullet point format of like, here's what everybody said, and a bunch of bullets. But for the process overview section, we did it more by theme. And so the conversation, for example, was a little bit out of order. And I know that threw some of you off initially, like, wait a minute, I made 2 points here, but I put them in, even though one person made 2 points at the same time, they're in 2 different sections in the meeting summary. And again, we like to do that because we think it's really helpful for going back and being able to track what was really talked about and how did, and how does that influence things going forward. But we just wanted to get people's feedback. Did you like one more than the other? Do you want us to mix and match as seems most appropriate to the topic? Any sort of opinions you have on that topic would be welcome. Yeah, Mary.
I don't think I got it, so
Really?
unless you didn't send it to the correct email.
Oh gosh, did that happen again? That you got left off this list? I'm gonna have to owe you 300 apologies and I don't know how that happened again, Mary.
It was included with another email, another attachment to Mary. So you might not have seen the second one. Is that possible?
Yeah, or it's possible
I
just
haven't
from the
gotten
old
any
list.
emails other than the one saying there was a meeting. I'm, I guess, not on the grand list that is used for most of the emails except for the meeting announcements.
Okay, you will for sure be added to that list.
Thank you.
And my apologies, that is really bad. So I don't know if we should then maybe preliminarily approve the summary and know that, Mary, if you have changes, we can make them and bring them to the next meeting. But anyone else want to weigh in on, Julia, on the structure?
Stacy, I just wanted to, for the benefit of the public, mention or actually have you explain that this is the summary that will be posted, right, to the individual meetings as instead of what people are used to seeing as minutes, basically. Right?
Yes, and it has been posted already as draft, and then we will create the revised edition and send that and post that as well. But yes, this functions as meeting minutes for this committee.
Thank you.
Any other thoughts or feedback on the structure and the design and the ways we did this? Okay, well, hearing none, we will.
I think David has a point.
Oh, sorry, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, Stacy, I mean, I think that I think we should wait till Mary reads it in full and maybe just, right, as you suggested earlier, vote on it as a whole. Then I just think that it's not fair to have us all discussing something when she hasn't read it. So I just, maybe we can just wait till the next meeting, unfortunately. Not her fault, and we should all just wait.
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, fair enough. Although I do wonder if she is not a voting member, does that mean she also does not vote on the minutes?
That's a good point.
She should
well, listen, I
have
think
gotten the minutes.
right. Yeah, she should have gotten the minutes, and she should have the ability to discuss them, which she doesn't. So even though she doesn't have a vote, she doesn't have the ability to discuss, which isn't right, I don't think.
Absolutely fair. Absolutely fair. Yeah, Peter.
From what I understand, she can participate in any discussion. She just can't vote. Yeah.
Exactly. All right. So let's hold off on approving the meeting minutes until next time. And they are posted in draft because we want people to see them. I think what we will do in the future is do a watermark for the draft so that everybody sees that that they are draft when they are sharing them. But I do want to encourage people to share the draft meeting summary, even though it is draft, with your constituents, because we know that people really want to know what's going on. Okay, so moving on to our next topic. Draft policy goals. So at our last meeting, we had a discussion about what success would look like from all of your perspectives. And from that, I have tried to compile my understanding of what it is this group aims to achieve. And, you know, we did speak about what is the problem we are trying to solve. And this is what I think we are trying to solve. That is because people disagree exactly on the connection between the problems that you are here for and their relationship to short-term rentals. And because, as I think we're going to hear as we get into the conversation about the policy development process, the first step of any policy development is to have a set of policy goals. It seemed to me that's the most helpful framing for how we do this. So I wanted to put this up as my best attempt to synthesize what I heard from the group. And my hope, as I think I mentioned last time, is that it may be that you don't care equally about all of these things, but that as a whole, this encompasses the things that this group really cares about and would like the whatever it is that we come up with for short-term rentals to try to achieve. So with that, I want to open this up to our primary members for discussion. Yes, Kathy.
Just a little bit of consistency might be helpful. Like the first bullet talks about prevent or reverse loss of available year-round housing due to STRs. Should there be some kind of thing that basically that all the goals are related to things that are due to STRs? Because otherwise, I mean, we can't avoid noise, nuisance, and other bad behaviors. We can't help that for things for just, you know, homeowners, you know, regular people who don't have STRs. So
Right.
just
Good point.
throwing that out there.
Yeah, I mean, I think that maybe if we put that due to STRs basically in the heading instead of trying to put it in each bullet, we might be in better stead. Thanks for that, Kathy. David.
Yeah, I don't know how it got left out or is, I mean, really the core reason this group was formed is to figure out how we work short-term rentals into our use chart, into our zoning use chart. And that's
But
really
to what end? Like, what's the goal?
Well, the goal
one step
is to fit it in a way that makes everyone comfortable, I guess. I mean, because 42 and 43 were basically zoning articles. And so I'm not sure to what end, but that's really where the rubber meets the road. And so I'm not sure how that fits into policy goals, but really that's one of the more important outcomes in this work group, I feel, at least.
Yeah, so maybe we could put that up here again in the heading is sort of, you know.
I guess the heading kind of says that in not such a technical way. So, but yeah. Yes.
But yeah, I think that makes sense. We can add it to the heading. Peter?
Okay.
Yeah, I keep bringing this up. I did when we had the organizational meetings as well. The short-term rental situation is the short-term rental situation, and it really has nothing to do with this. So I know it keeps coming back. I don't understand if somebody can explain to me how it will affect short-term rentals. I'm sorry, I meant housing, year-round housing, not short-term rentals, year-round housing. is going to improve by anything that we do. I'd like to know, but I don't really think that's the essence of what we're trying to put together here.
Yeah, I mean, I would only counter, Peter, that this is a issue not everybody agrees on. Whether there is any relationship between available year-round housing and STRs, right? I hear from you saying, you're saying, I don't think there's any relationship there. We've heard from other people that they do think there is a relationship. And so sort of and we're gonna try and look at some data that's gonna help us figure out what that relationship might be, if there is a relationship, et cetera. But in the meantime, we're going to, we're to
Should
the
you say
extent
then-
that we can find some relationship, right?
But the way it's written, you're making a statement. You're either preventing or reversing. We don't know whether we have to do anything. I think the issue is we have to look at whether year-round housing will go up if there's some sort of adjustment in STRs.
But is it
I mean,
not
if
true
year-round
that,
housing.
is it not true that people would like to prevent or reverse the loss of available year-round housing as a goal? And the extent to which it's connected to STRs is the extent to which we're trying to do it in this.
No,
process.
people would like to increase the amount of year-round housing. No one has ever been under the false pretense, as far as I know, that if we changed short-term rentals, eliminated them, I guess if you had no choice, you would make your house available. But that's not really what, I think if we go with that attitude, it becomes a problem. I think we need to discuss it before we put down as a fact, that's all.
Yeah. Okay. John.
Yeah, I don't know whether it fits here, Stacy, or not, but you know, we have discussions around, you know, corporate, commercial, investor-owned, short-term rentals, and you know, none of that, any of those words are in this anywhere. I don't know whether it should be or whether it's sort of the next level down in terms of how we discuss things, but just a question, should we have something in here about understanding what we mean by those kind of rentals, and are they a good thing, a bad thing, or not really relevant? That's all.
Yeah. And just to explain my reasoning here too, again, I sort of see that as the next level. That is the next level up, because we could say prevent corporate, commercial, whatever. And you can still ask the question, why? Like why would we do that? Right. And then you would get to one of these, right? Oh, because they're a problem. Why? Right. And so this is really meant to try to get to the base level of, like, we want to do this because right? Like, we want to reduce the loss of year-round housing because we don't have enough year-round housing, right? We want to prevent traffic and congestion because nobody likes traffic, and right, it's not, you don't have to ask why. Whereas commercial, corporate, those things might be a means for doing these other things, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Everyone else is.
Julia.
I guess maybe similar to John, I'm sort of comparing this to the defining success that we did in the first meeting, which it looks a lot like. And so in a sense, what John is mentioning is also sort of missing. And actually what Dave mentioned about sort of legal protection is also missing. So I'll go with the legal issue first. I agree with what you said, Stacy, which it could be introduced at the beginning of this sentence of the title, meaning, you know, we want to find a way to legalize some sort of use around short-term rentals that accomplishes, that preserves Nantucket's unique, you know, so maybe that's a way to do it, because I agree with Dave that that's a goal, is to have a zoning article at the end of the day. And then to John's point, so what I don't see in here is not just the idea of that was presented in the first meeting, which was discouraging or preventing the purchase of homes purely for STRs, but also, you know, sort of what that relates to is the fabric of the neighborhoods, I guess. And I think it was mentioned in the prior meeting, like the idea of having, people in homes or neighbors in homes to preserve the fabric of the neighborhoods and the community. I don't know if that's maybe the way to, and I sort of see it in the title, but it's not spelled out.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I mean, that was meant to be sort of the overarching idea there in the title, but it could be spelled out more, just the protection of, or the supporting neighborhoods and community.
Yeah, and I would definitely, I don't agree with what Peter Schaefer said about, that we think it's I think what you said, Stacy, is right, which is we don't all agree. We have different opinions of how STRs have had an impact on housing. And I think, people like Mr. Goodman, who's on this call, the other folks may have broader knowledge of this issue. So I would not want that to fall off this list.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, thank you. David.
Thank you, Stacy. I mean, I think everyone has some really good points here, and it may be helpful for us as a group, because of course none of us are going to agree with every single one, but that we all have an attitude of suspended disbelief on these items and let them float, because they are an issue to someone in our group until the data and the facts bore out a more sensible path. Does that make sense? So I don't necessarily believe in them, but I'm going to accept them and suspend my judgment on them until we get farther down the road. And it might be helpful if the fellow board members try to work that out in their heads as well.
Yeah, that's helpful. I mean, I think the spirit here is, if we were to come up with a set of policy interventions, be they zoning, be they bylaws, whatever they may be, maybe it has to do specifically with commercial and corporate, maybe it doesn't, whatever they might be, but they accomplish these things. Like, will we have succeeded? That's really the question, right? And you may say, well, I don't think there's a relationship between STRs and year-round housing. Okay, right? But we still will have, then that doesn't necessarily get in the way here, right? We want to sort of leave it open to see, is there some relationship? We're going to get further. The goal here is to make sure that the thing you most care about, the things you really want to see the policy do, are in here at this stage. Jim.
Yes, thanks. I agree with a lot of what's been said. And I think what we need to do is start with a clause that includes STRs in it, but keep what you have there. So it's something like, this is not the final language, but something like, something like establish fair, reasonable policies for STRs on Nantucket to help preserve Nantucket's unique characters, et cetera, et cetera. In other words, put STRs at the front. And we all know it's not going to solve everything. It's not even going to bring down the cost of housing. Maybe, I hope it will. I certainly hope it will if we have a reasonable policy for STRs, but it will help preserve Nantucket's unique character. And to go with what Dave said, I think we can all either agree that it will help or that there's a suspension of disbelief that we think it could help. But so I think if we start with a clause like that, establish fair, reasonable policies for STRs to help preserve. Because otherwise it looks like our main goal is to preserve Nantucket's unique character. I think we need the STR angle at the top.
Yeah. Very good. Very helpful. Thank you. Karen?
I really like overall, the way this is written. I just noticed with the support and ensure the benefits of the tourism economy for the people of Nantucket. That one I think is a very positive spin. It may be sort of semantics, but I also want to make sure we don't do anything that causes undue harm for, like businesses on the island or the economy of the island. So it's kind of said there, but just kind of wanted to make that point that was sort of how I was viewing that. Yeah.
Is there a way that you think it should be reworded to make sure that point is clear?
Maybe yeah, I'm not sure if it needs to go in explicitly, but just something that is supportive of assuring that that whatever we decide doesn't cause some unintended consequences to the community of Nantucket from an economic standpoint.
Yeah, okay. Great. Any other comments on this? Okay, so this is a work in progress. Right, we're not gonna carve this into stone or anything like this, but I think it's just helpful for us to have, and as we go, we can evolve it. So I will do a new iteration based on what I heard here. I'll bring it to our next meeting, and and this will help guide us as we start getting into the policy pieces. Okay, so with that, let me stop my sharing, and I am going to hand the floor over to Jeffrey. Jeffrey, if you want to just start off by introducing yourself and how it is you came to this group.
Sure. Let me share my screen here. Oh, can you enable my sharing?
I will
Yes.
do so.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay. Can everyone see that? Yep.
Yeah.
More or less. Great. So, a little bit about who I am. I'm Jeffrey Goodman. I'm a trained urban planner. I'm based in New Orleans, which, despite my flannel, is probably about 85 degrees. I've been working as a planner, as a consultant, as a data scientist for communities around the country and around Canada, specifically on short-term rental regulation and enforcement. How do we develop those systems? How do we make sure that they satisfy local values, local goals, and ultimately how are they enforced in a way that is fair and consistent? I wrote an article for Planning Magazine, which I'm sure you've read, all about how to regulate short-term rentals based on my experience here in New Orleans and based on some of the earlier cities that tried regulation, like San Francisco. From that, I got a call from what at the time was called Host Compliance, which was a startup around developing data tools and enforcement tools for the short-term rental, for governments to regulate the short-term rental industry. Host Compliance is now part of Granicus, which is a much larger government technology firm. Granicus does a bunch of different things. We work with dozens of cities in New England, in Massachusetts. We do agenda software, we do permitting, we do licensing, we do tax collection, we do all these things, but the one that's most important is the short-term rental side, is Host Compliance. And we think we have something special. We think we're the leading firm doing what we do. But we work with, as they say, 5,500 government agencies, and we have 1,500 employees, something like that. So before we get into the way that our system works and some of the most up-to-date data, I just want to talk as a planner about what I've seen in other places in terms of the regulation process. How do you go from what is often a very contentious issue, but also it can be difficult to kind of pin down because it involves so many different factors, so many different things, people's neighborhoods and people's money. It can be hard to even know kind of what we're talking about. So let's talk a little bit about the process of how do you define success and how do you kind of go from there, especially when you have lots of different versions of what success is. You have lots of different ways that people are coming towards this issue. So I usually talk about a planning lens. A planning lens is an overarching goal that allows the community to make nuanced and targeted regulation to the local context, which is because there are so many factors and so many different ways to take this issue, you need some almost like a sieve or a filter. I'm going to mix as many metaphors as possible so that you know at the end of the day why you're doing anything, why something is going in an ordinance or why something is being enforced a certain way. It's not just a big pile of things. It is rigorous and consistent so that you end up with hopefully regulation and systems that are rigorous and consistent. This issue tends to lead to yes or no, even though there's so many more positions than that, because there are so many different types of users and uses. How do you draw lanes? How do you define what is good for the community? What is not good for the community? Who defines that? All those things. Obviously, setting expectations. I think, as someone just mentioned, solving the short-term rental problem, whatever problem you define that is not going to solve every problem. It's not going to tie your shoes. It's not going to put your toddler to bed. It's only going to take you so far. So certainly, you always want to set expectations about what is possible when talking about this one particular issue. Obviously, we want to be basing our regulations not just in data, although I'm a data person, but I do think qualitative input is really important. We'll get to that a little later. Ultimately, it is about what happens on the ground, how people feel about what's happening. So it is important to take that seriously. And then it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway, enforcement is going to be the key to success, no matter what the rules are. I've seen ordinances written that are beautiful. They're the Mona Lisa of zoning ordinances, but the enforcement doesn't work. And then it was a waste of everyone's time, and people get even more frustrated because they go through a whole process and they don't see the end results. So having a lens, knowing how you're going to start to prioritize different elements, knowing where to get into the nuances of things and where to back off will just make your life a lot easier, because it makes the process easier to discuss. It's easier to understand really what you're all striving for and how to put it together. How do you develop a lens? The three inputs I often look to just begin to sort of lay a foundation of how do you discuss this issue? How do you start to describe how you prioritize different things? Really comes from three different inputs. So number one is the input from the community. Neighbors, hosts who are neighbors who are hosts, guests, business leaders, really anyone who's experiencing things on the ground. Renters, always a very difficult group to get input from, but important. How does it feel standing on your lawn, right? And we often have people, this topic comes up, maybe not so much where you are, but in other places, because, the mayor's house, there was a party next door to it and suddenly became an issue, right? So that by itself is something that's going to lead to an understanding of where people are coming from, but it's only part of the story. The next part would be on the quantitative data side, both in terms of the short-term rental market, and I think for you, because housing is something people want to talk about, the long-term housing market, both for renters and for homeowners, economic trends, tax information, things that are hard numbers that maybe give you a view across town, maybe give you a view in cold hard facts. They're not going to be very emotional. They're not going to be necessarily how people feel things are going, but they're a good way to verify perhaps hunches people have, or not verify hunches people have, or validate maybe what people are experiencing in their own lives. And then really the third piece, which is a very important piece, is up to a lot of the government expertise. The government is entrusted in a lot of ways to, and also other sort of trusted institutions, to look at things from a community-wide view. They're supposed to look at things both short and long term, both in terms of plans and priorities. Of course, they have to account for the budget. They have to account for legal issues within the US, the state constitution, all these things. And they're going to be the ones who are ultimately going to need to lead on enforcement. So they may have a view or an understanding or some sort of knowledge or some broader framework that they want to fit this into or prioritize. And so those three buckets really help you understand this issue well, build a good foundation, especially if we're talking to people who maybe don't always agree. But it allows you to then start to say, okay, based off of this information, based off what people are feeling, based off of what we can and can't do and want to do sort of at a government level or a long-term level, when the rubber meets the road, I'm going to prioritize this over this, or I'm going to make a decision, but it's all going to hang together because of things that we said in our comp plan, or things that were in that housing needs assessment, or things that were said in the economic development assessment. It all hangs together because it is all pulling in the same direction. This is really more about a process. number one, obviously, is clarifying goals. We're hopefully moving out of that soon, but certainly understanding why are we here? What is success going to be like, even if it's a very personal one? And I know lots of times people have very personal understandings of what they want to have success, but that's fine. That's really good to be able to talk those things out. I think the biggest thing is really, how do we integrate short-term rentals and whatever system there is or could be into broader discussions that are happening about a community vision. And sometimes that is about the politics of the place. Sometimes it's about the sort of expressed vision of what this place is going to be in 5 years or 20 years. But this is not a siloed issue. It's got to fit into other things that are happening in the community, other things that have already been discussed, or other plans that are already being done, changes that you anticipate to see happen. It makes it easier to point to a goal, because it is not floating out in space. It's related to other things that people care about. Determining tools. So this is, I think, where we're going to be heading pretty soon, which is what are some of the actual mechanisms that would help achieve some of our goals? How do they all work together? How do they fit into existing structures? How do they fit into existing budgets? How do they fit into things that we want to see happen? You know, are there things that we need to expand because we see opportunities? You know, certainly there are lots of places that have used this issue to go in a very different direction around housing. You know, this is often a way in for communities like yours that do have very robust and deep tourism markets. But certainly, how's this going to be enforced? Who's going to actually do it? What's that going to start to look like? And then later on, gauging success. So, you know, none of us are Moses coming down from the mountaintop. Things often change, contexts change. You know, how are we going to understand the effects that we think are important to measure, and whether we can start measuring them now, or whenever anything may come into place? How will we look at 3 or 5 years and know whether we achieve the things we want to know, or even begin to measure the types of successes that we're looking for, and be prepared for additional changes? Now, I know, because New Orleans is about to write its third short-term rental ordinance in 4 years. I didn't write any of them. That this is an uncomfortable topic to imagine coming back to, but it is important. If we're going to set goals, we also need to think about, how do we measure those goals? How do we see that we have accomplished the things that we actually set out to do? When I talk about applying a lens, I know it sounds very jargony and very theoretical, but I've listed a couple dimensions. You know, when we talk about short-term rentals, we're talking about a lot of different types of properties. So how do we ensure, as I say, their consistency and transparency of regulation choices? Why did this group come together and make the choices that it wants to make, or anyone who writes an ordinance make the choices you want to make? How is that consistent, sort of internal to the document, or internal to the document and the goals that are attached to it? Like I said, it can be a filtering mechanism, so that you can justify when someone comes up and says, hey, the new rule says I have to do it this way, but I wanted to do it this way. You know, how do you convince that person, or maybe not convince that person, how do you justify to that person that the rules are made under a system that is logical, that is understandable? I've listed a bunch of dimensions here, and you can think of how many different combinations there are. And if you don't have an overarching goal or an overarching vision, you know, that you might call a lens, it's really hard to choose this or that, or these or those, or here but not there, and be able to consistently say why you did that. You know, I've seen plenty of ordinances where it says you can't do 15 people, and someone always asks, why 15? I want to do 16. And there's no real logic behind it. It's just, you know, we came up with that number. Same thing with caps, same thing with anything else. You know, how do you justify the choices that you want to make? And that, as you write an ordinance, can be a good check to be able to go back through a draft and say, does this all, like I said, pull in the same direction? Is it consistent? Having a consistent lens really also does help with enforcement, because, as I say, whatever you're allowed to do, you want it so that that person can walk into the town planning office and know exactly what form to fill out, with 2 questions or 3 questions. I've seen some places where they get really out of control, and there's a lot of loopholes. There's a lot of ways people game the system because, you know, someone came in at the last moment and added some whole section, and it didn't actually help anything. It made it much more confusing. And it also allows you, again, as you go through it, to focus on outcomes and impacts. You know, everything you put in an ordinance, everything you consider as a regulatory tool or enforcement system is going to be focused on a specific impact that you've identified through your goal setting, through your lens setting. And as I put as a reminder there, no mushy ordinances. There are a lot of ordinances that are mushy, where 10 people get in a room and each bring 10 ideas, and then they put them all in an ordinance. And, you know, Louisiana is famous for gumbo. Gumbo, you can throw a lot of things in. You can't throw anything in. You can't throw ice cream in there. You can't throw, a whole steak. It's got to really make sense together. It's got to be harmonious. And a lens allows you to maybe remove things or alter things so that it is harmonious. It is all pulling in the same direction. So I want to talk a little bit about what Granicus does and what the host compliance system does in terms of data collection. So what we do is we look at publicly available information, only publicly available information. We scrape public listings. So we go to all the, I think it's 70 or 80 of the major platforms, and we'll talk a little bit about platform issues later. And we take all those input points that people have listed in their listing, and including also, their calendar, their activity, the reviews, the date and time of those reviews, everything that's on that page, we are scraping and putting into our system. Our biggest success then is to take those listings and match them to specific real world addresses. So if you go on Airbnb and you type in Nantucket, those dots that appear on the map are not exactly where those properties are. What we do is we use the information from those listings and publicly available sources, including Google Street View, Zillow real estate listings, anything that is, again, publicly available, to match those listings to specific addresses. Once we're able to do that, and they are tied together with your assessor's information, so that gives us the name of the owner, anything that comes from the assessor, the owner's address, the value of it, any of that sort of stuff. We do deduplicate. So if you do list on multiple platforms, we will still tie that to one specific address. We actually use both machine learning and human analysis to review these matches so that we are very confident. We actually provide, as part of our dashboard, a confidence interval to understand we are 99% that this is exactly this address. Sometimes we're a little less. The hardest ones are always big, 100-unit apartment buildings because the apartments look so similar. But we do have that information. So we stand by our matches. And then this is really more for enforcement. We timestamp all these screenshots. So we're taking screenshots constantly of every listing. We are timestamping them. It's, I often talk about kind of a red light camera system, but it is definitive that these listings were saying a certain thing at a certain moment. What we don't do, and I always have to point this out because people will accuse me of it, we do not hack your computer. We don't favor any particular platform. We don't have deals with only one platform to kind of look the other way against their platform in particular. We don't expose any private information. This is all information that either comes from something that is publicly available in a government database, or it is something that people have chosen to put as an advertisement on a listing site. We never query anyone's financial institutions. And then while we have a lot of data, and we'll walk through a lot of the data that we have, I'm not going to publish it. I'm not going to publicize people's contact information, tax information, address information, revenue records, any of that sort of stuff that is a cardinal sin in our work. So that's all going to be internal to us and to the local government. And then again, we're not quite there, but we never attempt enforcement directly. So if you we're caught with some sort of violation, that check doesn't come to Granicus. That's not how we're doing things. Any sort of enforcement that eventually would come with our service, we are just a tool for a government entity to enforce its rules. We offer a service where we'll mail out letters. We're not writing that letter. It's coming on government's letterhead. We're just stuffing the envelopes. So we're not vigilantes out here running around. You know, we do take data security very seriously, and we do want to make sure that people feel like their privacy hasn't been invaded in any meaningful way. So let's talk about some of the data that we do collect. On the left there, you'll see some of the basic stuff. So for every short-term rental listing, we're right now almost done with our initial sort of address mapping. We have the parcel number. With that, we have the underlying zoning. Again, that's from local government. We have the address, and if we can, a unit number, if a unit number exists for every listing. From, again, the parcel information, we have the owner's name and what their listed mailing address is. And then if they have decided to register ownership with an LLC, we would know that as well, because it would be listed. That doesn't necessarily mean anything about the corporate structure or anything, because I believe for tax purposes, a lot of accountants will tell you to put almost any property into an LLC. But it certainly gives us an in to start to look at maybe some of the information there. So from that, we have some research questions I think that people were interested in. The number one, and I think it's come up again and again, is how do we differentiate maybe different kinds of users and the different kinds of uses out there? Because there are so many different kinds, and maybe we want to, as we think about regulatory tools, be very focused on certain ownerships, certain sizes, certain numbers, whatever it is. Not everyone's the same. I know everyone comes up as those little red dots, you know, on the map when you look for a short-term rental, but there's just a lot of nuance in there. And, you know, how do we use some of this information about the houses to get at that and start to be able to maybe put hosts or potential hosts in different buckets. Certainly, I know a big topic is what can we determine about the relationship between short-term rentals and long-term housing? Is there a relationship? Is there a relationship that is not ultimately meaningful if the goal is long-term housing, if things don't become long-term housing? How is this shifted over time? And that's something we can look at under kind of other connections, is because these are tied to ownership records, can we see some changes in neighborhoods or changes in the style of building or the size of building in terms of when things are sold? And certainly the question about how does this affect sort of tourism as an industry? You know, something that I've mentioned, I think before in talking to several of you, is something that's come up in New Orleans, it's come up in Galveston, it's come up in a lot of different places. You know, how much money stays on the island? Often a big question people have is that if things are owned by people or entities who are not local, you know, what impacts are being kept on the island, which impacts are ending up in a bank account in Boston or San Francisco or Dubai. You know, we can start to get at some of those questions as well if that's something that we want to do. Another thing that we can do, and I think probably several of you have hunches about this already, which is looking at baseline long-term rental and seasonal housing rates by type. You know, if we ever talk about what the effects are on long-term housing, even farther down the road, if we want to talk about, say, incentives, which, you know, some ski communities in Colorado have turned to about seasonal housing especially, we need to have some understanding of what would be an effective incentive, what would actually be the long-term rate that we need to target if we're going to talk about affordability or just even access for people who would be able to occupy those homes. So that's the sort of basic property information data points that we are gathering on every listing on the island. Next would be really about the property itself, or at least what people are claiming their property is. So that is sleeping capacity, the number of guests, the number of bedrooms and bathrooms they're listing, minimum night stay, which I've noticed an interesting trend where different platforms have people kind of choosing to list the same property for different numbers of nights. Airbnb, it seems to be 3. VRBO, it might be 7. I think there's a little bit of targeting there. The rental unit type, whether it's a whole unit, which we would say the guests have total access to everything, there is not someone else present, not whether that's the owner or an operator or whatever, versus partial, which would be individual bedrooms, couches, things that maybe don't have kitchens. You know, for the most part, as we'll get into, it's almost all whole home rentals as we describe it. And then also the platforms. So we have listing, we are able to break down the platforms, which ones people are shifting to, or what some unique characteristics are ones to the others. Some questions that have come up about this is certainly when you get to a maximum capacity, you start to multiply across all the maximum capacities, and you look at the impacts on infrastructure, whether that's on roadways, traffic, but even as I mentioned there under other connections, water and waste quality issues have come up in a lot of places, as are the pipes and the septic systems and the sewer plants and the dumps and everything. What are they able to hold? And sometimes they were designed for different usage patterns than short-term rentals or even a vacation rental economy. Can we look at shifts in the scope and scale? Are things shifting towards different types of buildings, ones with more sleeping capacity, or maybe higher numbers of people, but the same number of bedrooms? People are putting more people into the same units. We can start to look at that over time. And sort of how do we segment even the tourist market? You know, we'll get to a very interesting data piece later about the size of some of these properties. Lots of places you can kind of guess the type of people who are coming based off of size. You know, me and my wife and my toddler are probably going to get a 1 or 2 bedroom. Me and 20 of my college friends are going to get a very different structure. You can start to understand maybe different nuances within, you know, this mass that we call tourism. And then the other thing, this is almost more for us and local government, which is consistency between the physical building, the way people are listing, and the official records. And we often find discrepancies. I'm not going to put any, you know, blame anyone for anything, but discrepancies between, you know, the building I would say have 3 bedrooms, the listing says it has 5 bedrooms, and the local assessor says it has 2 bedrooms. Well, it's going to be one of those, so let's try to make it all even. And we've seen a lot of sort of side efforts come out of that work when we get to how it would be implemented, or what you would have to say in order to get, say, a permit or inspection or whatever. But it's an important one to kind of keep in mind how accurate some of these records are beyond even just what we're pulling from the platforms. And then the third sort of big tranche of data we're collecting is about activity. So we can see whether whether a listing is active or not. We can see when it was added to these platforms, what's their first activity on it, whether that's a review or a closed booking date or whatever. What's the latest activity? What's the last documented stay? What is their calendar for all of these listings, and the nightly rate? And now from all of those pieces, we have available 2 estimates. One would be about revenue. So we actually put together, based off that activity, and also some knowledge from other communities, other similar communities, in terms of data we've gotten back subsequent to an ordinance. We have a low, a mid-range, and a maximum revenue estimate, and we have a low and mid-range and maximum number of nights stay. That is an estimate, and we're very clear it's an estimate. One of the things that we often talk about is that it is very difficult to take that to a level of enforcement, which is to say, if you need to take that to court, you need to prove it, and you need to say it is exactly that number. We cannot do that. We are able to make some estimates and glean some information about the general short-term rental market, but it is not really totally up to the level of a true enforcement tool. But I do think it's going to be useful, I think, for all of you, to perhaps, again, get some more nuance into the types of users and the types of uses that, that are found in all those dots on a map. Those patterns, I think, will be really illuminating. And I know there's a lot of different types of people who are often held up as, kind of short-term rentals that we want to expand opportunity for, or we think don't have the impacts on certain things that we're that concerned about. And then other ones have more impacts. We might be able to start to get at that kind of nuance. If we get to the level of incentives, as an example of a regulatory sort of system we could put into place, do they pencil out? We found this in a lot of places that are trying to do things like rent subsidies, let's say, not that I'm proposing that, but they don't pencil out. The subsidy isn't enough to make people change their behavior in one or the other. So we do need to get some understanding of what might put pressure on people to change or what might be attractive for people to change their behavior. And then something that has come up, I know repeatedly, what are some of the broader economic and tax implications of different scenarios? If different pieces of the short-term rental industry are enhanced or shifted, we can start to get some sense, or at least be able to further investigate, what would that mean for different types of businesses? What would that mean for broader tax collection, for real estate tax collection, all these other things? So at least gives us an insight a little bit into where the money is flowing and how much money are we really talking about. So before I continue, and partially because I need to drink some water, do people have any questions about about how we collect that data? What is that data for, or what some other questions we want to get into? Kathy. I think you're muted, Kathy.
You're muted.
It didn't, okay, sorry. I can't wait to see this data. Question is, so when we're gonna get it. So as I was taking some notes, I noticed that although one of our goals has to do with traffic, there were no data points about cars. So I wonder about that. Also, there are a lot of homes on the island that are, that they have a seasonality issue. They're not year-round homes. Do you have any access to categorize those differently?
Mhm.
And would it be possible to determine host revenue based on the STR taxes that the town collects as another factor?
Yeah, so I believe we collect, so we're actually taking all of the information from the listing, which includes things that don't have official little categories on, say, Airbnb. So I know there are some platforms that don't really have a category for you list, parking spaces. You just have to kind of write it in. We're collecting all of that, and if that's a data piece we want to kind of expand on, we can do that. Often it's tied much more to maybe say occupancy or the number of bedrooms, but we can certainly explore that more. A lot of our revenue estimates actually come from and are interesting more to tax collectors, because they want to be able to do some sort of auditing, even on a kind of top tier scale, to understand, are they seeing the tax rates that they think they should? If they're taxes that people are filing, especially in places that don't have the platforms collect the tax, that you're supposed to report it personally, if someone reports they made $100 and you see, okay, they've had 150 reviews this year, it gives you some idea that maybe something is up. So again, those are estimates, and we can start to pair them to other factors in order to determine something about the nuances of those populations. Yeah, absolutely.
And about the seasonality of homes?
Yeah, so we're taking I should have mentioned this. We're taking screenshots of all of these listings at least every 2 or 3 days. So we're able to have some understanding over time. We have some data shots from going back, I think, even to 2016. They're not spaced in the way that I would space them, but we do have some that capture capture some summers. And then we have better information, certainly over the last year or last 6 months, which includes the summer. And actually, in this next section, I'll mention some of the numbers from, I chose July 4th as a sort of mid-peak summer. If there's a better date, we can do that. But we're able to have that information over time, because I know there is, I was specific about trying
My
to.
question actually goes more to homes that are just not livable year round. So they're not available to be an affordable housing home because you can't live it year round. So I just wondered if we could tell those are a different category of house is all.
I don't know if that information is how that information is collected. It's possible that might be indicated in some sort of assessor records. I don't know off the top of my head. If it is in some way, then we would be able to tie that directly to the parcel and to the home. But I don't know if that is collected specifically. Maybe one of you do. Julia.
Thanks, Jeff. We had a pretty productive data meeting on Tuesday last week to talk about what you guys had and maybe what the town had and how it could all work together to fit into a bigger picture. I know you're about to get into what you have, so that'll be great to see. And I'm just curious, have you been able to establish what you can get beyond what you will present today, or are we going to have a sort of a discussion about that after you present your data in terms of the town and what the great work that they did around the registry and tying it to the assessor data? That's 95% there.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we did in the last week from the time of our meeting to today is we went from, I think we were only at about 30 or 35% identified listings to addresses. We're now over 95%. So in that week, we're able to get to a point where now we can really take that data and start to compare it to other sources. When it's at 35%, that's 35%. That's not really often enough to draw conclusions on, because maybe you got the 35% that was the easiest, and that's only part of the story. Mm-hmm. So besides sort of the update on the numbers in terms of the number of listings and some of the other categories, I haven't gotten to the point where we're able to connect it. That's sort of what is going to happen after this meeting. This is really a little bit to talk about what the current numbers are and the fact that we have gotten to a place where we have enough data that we feel very confident in, that we can actually start matching those parcel IDs. Something that I know Stacy and I talked about was making sure that we can do analysis that is still respectful of some of that information and the privacy concerns on it, especially if we get into some of those things about how much people paid for things. I know it's public information, but it's still, we have to go through a little bit of a process to make sure that those are connected in a way and not publicly available and any of that. So we're still working on that a little bit, but the next step is, now that we have all these addresses identified, we're able to take it to the next phase in terms of, I know you're very interested in a lot of the housing elements of it. So how do we start to get into some of those questions? Yeah. John.
Jeffrey, just based on what you know of us now from the meeting last Tuesday and so forth, and what you know of what our draft policy goals are, mm-hmm. Based on your previous experiences, how long is it going to be before we start to get data that we can really delve into and start using? And I'm assuming that's going to be a bit of a, not exactly a drip feed, but, some is easier than other. But I'm just trying to get a handle on when we're going to start to see things mm-hmm. that we can start to use and form opinions on.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that's what this this last week has been a little bit of a turnaround week because we did not have these addresses identified. So until the address is identified, it makes it really difficult because it's still two different data sets. Now that that is there, you know, I think some of the questions that we talked about at our data meeting, now we're able to actually sort of put into place, you know, questions about, you know, certainly some of the home ownership things, changes in home ownership, you know, even some of the baseline stuff about the revenue estimates, I think, and tying that to scales of properties, locations of properties, those sorts of things. You know, I think that'll be over the next few weeks is now my task, now that we've gotten from just getting everything in the same order and being able to query you know, local records about specific addresses, which until those addresses are identified, we can really do. And also getting into some of the nuances within the short-term rental industry of some of these listings are not active. Some of these listings haven't been active in over a year. Some of these listings have shifted over time, you know, trying to understand what some of those queries are going to be and what sort of caveats do we need to put when we talk about short-term rentals. Are we only going to talk about ones that were active in the last year? Are we going to talk about ones that were active at any time ever? So I didn't totally have that information until yesterday. And so now we'll be able to move on to the next phase where we have everything tied to public records and tied to addresses. Yeah. Peter.
Thanks, Jeff. I must say I found your presentation very interesting. I guess I wish I had had an opportunity to read some of your articles in advance. I think I just when I went on the web while you were talking, and I see you've written extensively, and I think it might be helpful if you would circulate or at least cite to us those leading pieces that you've written that and might save a lot of time in that sense. I guess my question is this: the data you're discussing or you're talking about generally now will certainly be helpful, but I'm not sure it will be helpful in the comparative sense. In other words, to what extent we obviously want to know to what extent STRs are at the root of the problems we are identifying, but how does that compare to the other? There may be other contributory things that are contributing to it, which may be even greater. I mean, for example, noise. I mean, the sort of the common view is, well, STRs create a lot of noise. Well, let's get the data from the police or wherever else. Just generally, where's the noise problem coming from? What about other hotels and other licensed entities on the island that are contributing to that are housing all these people? And how does the STR compare? So I guess it's the other comparative stuff that doesn't tie directly to the STRs that we also ought to be interested in.
Yeah, and I think that's true. The difficulty sometimes, especially with quality of life complaints, noise, trash, parking, those sorts of things, is lots of people just don't report it, right? Lots of people they don't feel comfortable escalating something to the police. They'd rather sort of stew about it or write it off or ignore it or write a nasty Facebook comment. I don't know. And so it's hard to get the same sort of rigor behind some of that. I think the question, especially about other lodging providers, is an interesting one, and certainly a one that's worth pursuing on a broader level, because you want to see in any kind of reaction to any change or no change at all, how short-term rentals, however we define them, fit into a kind of spectrum of lodging, from someone's couch once a year to a resort. Lots of places have started to look at, and this goes a little bit beyond what I'm tasked to do, but gets into, are you cannibalizing the market? Are you expanding the market? Are you shifting the dynamics? Would these people have come if not for this type of property or this sort of thing? That's a kind of economic analysis that we're not tasked to do. We'd be very happy to help people do. I think this came up at one of our meetings. The problem with some of those economic analyses is that they are often written to say whatever people want them to say, right? That it's sometimes hard to get the same sort of transparency or consistency that we would want. And certainly over the timelines I think we're talking about can be very difficult to put it together, but we can start to get into that based off of existing lodging. What would be the types of places that are similar enough that we would say that they actually maybe we can compare them, a bed and breakfast that's 4 bedrooms and a short-term rental that's 4 bedrooms in a similar place. I don't know. We can start to get into that, but again, it is about time, but also kind of what are we looking to gather from that kind of analysis, and how do we make sure that it's consistent and transparent and pushing us towards the resolution. Yeah.
Jeff, if I could just follow up with one other thing. Are you looking also, or is somebody looking at the quote unquote alleged strains we're placing on STRs or are placing on town providers, whether it's police, fire, you name it. Again, trying to determine whether or not the island has got the resources to handle the general tourism that it has, and if not, what does it need, and furthermore, are STRs the contributing factor, or is it something else?
Yeah, and sometimes that's very difficult to untangle, unless you have some very outrageous events happen where you do get police or fire involved. A lot of things are just not reported. We can, I think, theoretically at least, try to match complaints to addresses as short-term rentals. We do that usually going forward through enforcement. We could theoretically do some kind of look back, but that's probably a more of a hefty project than it's worth. A lot of times those quality of life things especially flow from definitions. I guess I'll put it that way, which is to say, certain combinations of a short-term rental, whether it's a hosted stay, or it's owned by someone over here, or it's a certain size, or it's in a certain place, you can often intuit maybe that there's more accountability or less accountability kind of within those short-term rentals based off the types, and intuit from that maybe what we anticipate some of the impacts are. I know those are estimations in their own right, but sometimes that's the best we can get with limited data, especially from first responders. Peter.
Yeah, maybe let's take the comments or questions from Peter and Jim, and then Jeff, where you move back.
Yeah, I can finish up my little thing here. Actually, let me just do that real fast. Let me just do it because it is very, very brief. Peter, Jim, hold your questions. So this is every property that we could identify. It's not the best map because it is zoomed out. The colors correspond to the listing platforms. This is zoomed in towards, and you can see, so the colors here correspond to whether we've identified the address or whether we're still waiting to identify it. It's neither here nor there, but these are specific addresses and specific units. And I did want to bring this up because this came up in our data meeting, that we are starting to, I'm starting to investigate what some of the other sources of information are when it comes to short-term rental listings. As was described, and as I know from personal experience, we have these big internet-enabled ones, the Expedia groups, which includes Flipkey, VRBO, Airbnb. They're certainly the largest. There are, I know, local and smaller real estate listing, not even platforms. I think platforms would be too broad for them. Listing sites where there is a not insignificant amount of business. And so we are working on how best to capture that so that we have some idea of whether there is some difference between that type of data and the other data we are collecting. Obviously, some of those I think are probably listing on some of these bigger platforms, but I did want to flag that because it is something that we're trying to figure out, what we can do for that data because it is I know an important part of the industry there. As you can see, a very large segment of the market posts on some of these big platforms, and they cross post often again with slightly different markets in mind. But these are the real important numbers. So as of last week, there are 2,007 listings in the boundary that we were given. Of those, 1,962 are short-term rental listings. So the difference there is that there are 40 that are listing for longer than 30 days. That's our current internal definition. Of those, 1,755 had some sort of activity over the last, it says 2022, but really it's over the last 12 months. So any kind of activity would be any change in the listing, any change in the listings active, sort of whether it's listed or not listed, any bookings, any changes to the calendar, anything that shows that someone has logged in and done something. That would be what that number is. Just as a look back, there were 1,955 listings on July 4th. Now I know because of the nature of your industry and the nature of the island, often people are booked way more in advance than July 4th, right? If they're looking to be there, for August 1st. But I did try to find something earlier, in the middle of the summer to get a sense of that. Those listings represent a specific number of units. So obviously you could list across multiple platforms. We actually deduplicate that to figure out how many physical units are represented by all those listings. We right now have that number as of mid-October at 1,338 short-term rental units, of which 1,200, a little over 1,200, had some sort of activity in the last year. That number was 1,600, almost 1,700 on July 4th. Within that, 92% of these listings or these units are in what we call single family homes, which would be anything that does not have multiple unit numbers attached to it. Only 6% were in multi-unit buildings. And again, some of that comes down to the nuances of how addresses are done. So in places that might have carriage houses, mother-in-law suites, sometimes they don't have separate unit numbers. We can adjust, I think, to accommodate some of that. 94% of those listings are for entire homes, and only 5% were for partial homes where the tourists or the guests would not have full access to the unit. Something I mentioned earlier, but as something that struck me is almost 40% of all the listings are for 5 bedrooms or more, which is a very unique circumstance in housing, certainly in the towns that we work with. And then not surprisingly, that nightly rate is probably one of the highest in the nation. I don't think that's surprising at all. It's $844 as of now. I wasn't able to pull the number from the summer. I suspect it is probably significantly more than that. But that's an average. And again, because you have so many very large properties, I think that's the average of quite a large range, both in terms of nightly price, but even weekly or even monthly or season. So that is the current state of the market on the island based off the data we were able to put together and finally match this week. I see it's 95% matched. So that's the main data. I'll just keep it on this. So that's the main data points we were able to pull thanks to getting all these things matched yesterday. Yeah. All right. Sorry, Peter and Jim, for leaving you sitting there.
Okay, Jeffrey.
Yep.
Because a couple of things, if you can get data for us or not. Is there any way we can find out the room nights or the weeks of rental per location? In other words, if you list a location and you're renting for one weekend, we really don't care. I thought this doesn't really fall to the pile. How do you find out those who are renting for a longer period of time? So
we do keep track of minimum night stays. So that's one way we get at some of that. Often people say 7 days minimum. That's just what it is off the top. On top of that, we do have access to looking at the calendar to see how often that calendar is open or closed on specific days. And then also we look at things like reviews and when those reviews are stamped, in order to get a sense of, okay, if someone's leaving if there's someone leaving a review every 3 days, we know that they, that's renting probably every 3 days. So we have some ability to get at that, even if they say their minimum night stay is 1 night, but they never do 1 night. They always do 7 nights. We have some ability to glean some information there. Yeah.
Calendars stay up year to year. In other words, can you look at 2021 now that we're in 2022 to see the difference?
I don't think so, although we did capture some of that information at points, multiple points of the year, going back a number of years. I don't know if we always have the level of detail that we do for, once we started this process more recently. We do have some estimates on them in terms of the number of nights, for example, probably in that year that we think they rented. We're able to do some of those estimations. I don't think there's a point where it gets too fine grained for us to really be as definitive. If you said how many were, available on January 21st, I don't know if we have that level of granularity, but I think we can look at trends over the course of the year for a lot of those units, even going back a few years. Yeah.
Okay. And then my last question is, when I looked at your charts, the VRBO and the Airbnb represent such a significant part, and there's nowhere on there for us to determine how much of that business is being done by our realtors in town, which,
yeah,
number one, it means a significant amount of their income. Do realtors operate through VRBO and through Airbnb, or where are the realtors rentals?
There's a few different ways. Some realtors and some property management companies have their own sites, basically, in the same way that you can look up, local real estate in general. It is a robust industry there. There are property managers and real estate agents who they specialize in, and they have often a very, a boutique element to it. At the same time, within that, you might have those same property managers or even the property owners saying, well, if we're going to try to rent something for a month, we're going to use this boutique firm that's going to do a month, but also these other seasons or these other months, we're going to do 3 days. And so we're going to put it on Airbnb because we want to get everyone's, 20-year college bro trip or whatever it is, right? So I think even within those different platforms have slightly different audiences. And so I think there are a lot of people who look for different audiences by listing on multiple platforms or through multiple agents. Also, a lot of times, people switch from having an agent to not because they want to make that extra money, or they're going to use it in a different way. So I wish it was super consistent, but people are really often all over the place in terms of what they look for and how they try to maximize whatever it is they're trying to maximize. Yeah.
I don't know what the number is, but perhaps there's some realtors that are on the line. We'll ask the question later. But I would believe that the realtors on the island rent probably a more significant piece than maybe the other two large companies. I'm not sure. Or maybe because people are renting through Airbnb and the realtor, that is only showing up as the Airbnb, and the realtor might be getting 7 days where the Airbnb might be getting 3, whatever the number is. So
Yeah,
I think we really got to look into that.
Yeah, I definitely want to look into that. And also it can depend on what factor you want to find. If you just want to find the number of units, maybe it's not as important, because once you identify it in one, you've identified it. When you start to talk about,
we don't
revenue,
care how much money Airbnb makes. We don't care.
Right.
We do
Right,
care
right.
how much money Joe Smith realtor makes.
Right. So I think you can try to find the data that's gonna get you to a very specific place. Certainly, just in terms of understanding the scope and the scale, it is a really important piece, and we're trying to figure out the best way to capture some of that information. Some of that is looking at the license information and the tax collection information to see, okay, many of it, I assume most people are generally pretty good. So which ones are we not seeing in our own system? Okay, they must be doing things either entirely through realtor or through word of mouth. That'll give us at least some access to some of those units. We're just going to have have a little bit of an internal discussion about at what point do we say we've identified roughly the number, because if, we want to try to be as accurate as possible, and we can do some of that through those licenses and some of that tax information, but we want to make sure that we're presenting data that is accurate. Yeah.
Thanks, Jeffrey.
Yep. Jim, you've been waiting very patiently.
Yes, thanks. And this is not my question, but just to answer Peter's point very quickly from an anecdotal point of view, when my wife and I did STRs, we found it was much easier to do it through something like VRBO than through the local realtors. Maybe that was just our experience, but it was astonishingly easier, for good or bad. But my question is, Jeffrey, this is great information. My question is about number of occupants per house. I'm wondering, is there some way to compare average occupants for, let's say, I don't know, a 4-bedroom house when it's STR versus when it's a family that's living there, whatever, the owners, whatever, whoever it is, renters. I'm wondering, whether that's available partly through census or just comparisons, but I think that might be some important information for us, as tangible as it is.
Yeah, I think a lot of that would come through, say, the American Community Survey, which is the sort of more nuanced census about that has housing, that actually will have a number. Sometimes that number is, you have to compare it to kind of the built environment, right? Because it might be more of an average, and you're like, well, you've got some very large properties, you got some very small properties, right? So we have some of that. I think that often what's the interesting thing to me about those maximum occupancies is how does it compare to the number of bedrooms, and how does that compare to the number of bedrooms that officially they have? Let's say, often you see places where it's 3 bedrooms, sleeps 16.
Yeah.
That to me indicates that that's a very specific arrangement versus when you see, okay, it's 3 bedrooms, sleeps 6 or 8. You're like, well, that's 2 people per bedroom plus 2, which is the pretty common occupancy standard for short-term rentals. That gives you maybe a sense of the market that those properties are looking for, or just kind of what they're willing to tolerate, or whatever it is. So all of that together, I think, can give you some things. The other piece that has become more relevant regarding occupancy, to your point, is about water and waste, which is a lot of water systems and waste systems are, should you have anyone on a septic system, which I hope you don't, are designed for a certain expectation of use from, say, a normal American 3-bedroom home. That normal American 3-bedroom homes, no matter where you are in the country, don't have 8 adults washing and cooking and taking showers. They probably have 2 adults and maybe 2 kids or something. And so there are some places that are starting to look at, modeling the water side of things or the waste side of things. I think that's, again, a little beyond our scope, but it's something that I think it's worth asking some questions about and trying to make sure that we're taking into account in general. Yeah.
Right. And as far as we've talked about the difficulty of tracking noise problems and traffic problems and so on, but if we can get specific numbers that are pretty definite about, the normal short-term rental with 5 bedrooms might normally have 12 or 14 people in it, as opposed to when it's a family, it's, 8 people or whatever. I mean, that will, I think, inform our decision-making to some extent. So I'm just wondering if that's possible to do.
Yeah, and that's something that I think we can start to break out from some of these numbers. I do want to look at what is the average nightly rate by number of bedrooms listed, right? I'm guessing the 5-bedroom places are not $844 a night. I think they're probably significantly more. Is that going to fall, that same sort of pattern going to fall to some of these smaller units that are listed? Or is it's really top heavy, right? With these larger properties.
It will also be important if the 2 bedrooms that are in short-term rental generally have 6 to 8 people as opposed to 3 people when it's not a short-term rental.
Right.
That bump up is equally as significant in terms of the stress on the infrastructure.
Yeah, and I think speaking to my earlier point, you can probably gain some inferences on the impacts, their potential impacts from some of those types of properties based on off even just a simple number of that. If you have a 2-bedroom place and it can sleep 16, you're like, the potential for impacts on neighbors is maybe much higher than a 2-bedroom that lists for 4 people. Now you could have 4 loud people. I've been there, but the implications I think you can start to draw from. Absolutely.
Yes, thank you.
Julia. Sorry.
So Jim actually made a really good point about sort of the occupancy versus maybe either a year-round home or a summer home. And I think the advantage here is that Nantucket's a county. So we do have some data that, we wouldn't have just by the sheer size of the place otherwise. And I think if I recall, the census says that the average year-round home is 2.9 people, which is actually a little high for the state, but doesn't sound very high when you think about it compared to the STR, which I think is closer to 8. And obviously you can tie that to a lot of other things. So that's really nice that you're thinking about it that way. I think it would be great if there are some, real estate individuals, certainly if you haven't reached out to realtors to talk about the data, because I know you're going maybe straight to the technology and trying to scrape, websites, maybe that's a way to get them involved, because when I look at these numbers, we've done a fair amount of research on the registry, which I believe the last version that I saw, which was a few versions ago now. So have you seen the most updated version of the registry and how many STRs were registered?
I have seen a version. I don't know if it's the most recent one, and I don't remember the number off the top of my head. I think something I definitely want to do, and what struck me is this difference between listings and active listings. And a question I guess I'd be interested to pursue would be, what does that compare to some of the registry things? Because I think there are probably a lot of people who register and then don't use it, or use it very, very little. I think there are probably people who forgot they put a listing up at some point. I'd like to try to understand maybe how those things are related, or who's, like I said, who's got a registry but is not on a major platform. Again, that's just it's gonna enhance some of these numbers, some of the same numbers we wouldn't be able to get just by knowing that. But I think it is important to get a sense and to see if there's anything unique about some of these properties we're missing, whether they're all from the same area of the island or whether the same size, and we go, okay, the only ones we're missing are from this one part and they're all 6-bedroom mansions. We should probably find the real estate person who represents all of those, because that would tell you that that would,
I mean,
that would
I
do
think
that.
I mentioned this at our meeting on Tuesday, but this isn't just an estimate from our work over the last couple of years. And there are some smarter people who are actually in the real estate business who might have a different opinion, but our understanding is it may be up to 50% of the market. So if you're saying there are 1,300 or 1,600, it's always hard to kind of play with these numbers. So 1,600 units available on July 4th. And if we thought that was 50% of the market, then it's actually
quite a bit higher.
Right?
Yes.
So it seems to me like the obvious missing piece, right? And the registry, I agree with you, may not be the answer, but maybe just be a way to gauge, how many you're missing potentially.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is has been brought up. There are probably people who both are using a real estate agent and are listing, and maybe they don't do any business through their listing on VRBO and they do it all through their real estate, but we're still capturing it. And so again, we just have to kind of
I don't, my understanding, and that's where, talking to them directly or having them directly speak on this would be helpful, but the cross listing between the realtors and the big platforms is not necessarily a huge issue, or at least the realtors don't necessarily cross list, if you want. So
or they don't know.
The owner might, or they don't know. That's
right.
But they're not paying double commissions on,
This is true.
right? Otherwise you're down to like 40% goes to the owner.
Yeah, right. But
Um,
this is I think a really, really important piece. And I know you flagged it when we met before, and I think now we're able to build off what we have and start to get into it, because it is a unique piece that we don't. It is hyper local, right? It is not something that we encounter very often, but it is very important. And just to get a sense of what don't we know that we don't know, I think is really important. In the meantime, as we build that out, this is I think a good start to understand at least the contours of the market from the data that we have readily available. More data that we get is only going to fill in and enhance that. So, this is, again, I'm not saying this is 100% exactly what it is. If you could magically know that number, this is the best what we can do through the technology that we have. It's going to need more things to enhance it, I think, to get at some of these peculiarities of your local market. So now we've gotten through this part, we can now move on. At least I say we, it means me. I will go on and be able to start to enhance this data with some of these other inputs and keep building from that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I would just say, I think we're all looking forward to figuring out, as you advance, like you checking in so that,
oh yeah,
we can sort of see where this is going. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think there are so many different avenues to pursue. I'm in this also to answer questions as they develop. I wouldn't ever expect anyone or any group of people to say, okay, we've come up with the 8 questions that we need, see in June and problem. That's not going to happen. This is going to be an ongoing conversation as we now that we have some of this data to be able to pursue avenues that are important to getting somewhere. Yep. Karen.
Hi, just for some context background data, I'm curious, do we know how many actual residences there are on Nantucket total, so that we can kind of get a sense of what percentage are these 1,300 or 2,000 or whatever?
I believe that is available through the census or through the American Community Survey, and we would be able to come up with that number. And but it can be a contextual problem, because it may not tell you that much about anything in particular.
Just as a sort of
but we can get a number. Yeah.
Yeah. And then also how many residences are owned by residents versus non-residents, just for context as well.
Yeah. So what we can do, I'll speak specifically to that, is because we have tied these to the parcel information, which has an owner. That owner has a name and an address. That address we can very quickly figure out what percentage of those addresses are not in Nantucket. Now, again, there's probably a lot of little nuances where someone has registered their LLC in Delaware, but they live on Nantucket and they're doing their thing. So we can only go so far, but we can get some of those numbers to even start to, again, sketch some contours to what that is, because I know it's a big topic, and I think right now people have hunches, but there's not even a number to even begin with to sort of move past that. Yeah.
Yeah, and just in the general population, not just in the STR market.
Yeah.
And then just so I'm clear, like when it says the 1,300 STR units, does that mean properties, and therefore because there are more listings than that's because a unit could have multiple listings? Is that
Correct.
How to interpret that? Okay.
Yeah,
All
unit
right.
unit is the physical space. The listing is just the advertisement. Yeah.
Great, thanks.
John.
Yeah, just a question, I guess, for all of us. But, last week, sort of on the off week of our main meeting, we had the 1-hour data meeting. And I'm just wondering, to Julia's point about checking in with you, Jeffrey, would it make sense sort of on our off week to just have a data meeting, every off week for an hour, and just progress only data in that meeting. Because I, you know, personally speaking, found it to be extremely valuable, and I thought we kind of moved stuff forward. But how does everybody feel about that? That maybe we have a regular 2-weekly data meeting on our off week?
Yeah, thanks for that, John. I'll jump in here and just say, I was actually going to propose that we have a data meeting, this one actually on Friday, because in addition to all the things that Jeffrey is doing, we know there are legal questions. And that is a time that we can get the town council to meet with us on Friday morning. So I was going to suggest that we reconvene the data subgroup again this Friday at 10 to focus primarily on legal questions, collecting those legal questions so that we can have town council come to the next meeting. But Jeffrey is also available, and so we could continue to iterate on the questions for him as well.
Yeah, and I really love, I really love this stuff. So I'm more than happy to again pursue a lot of avenues. I do want to make sure that, it's all being done in some sort of agreed upon fashion, and we're all pulling towards something. So as much as I love diving into this, I do want to make sure that I don't get some giant list from every individual, and it's all going in different directions, and it's not kind of pulling towards something. It's not an organized. So that's my only concern. Actually, it's two concerns. That's one, and the other one would be just making sure that I have some of these privacy things in place. I would love to be able to show people this dashboard and get into the data, but I just simply cannot expose people's names and addresses and revenue estimates and those sorts of things. I just am not allowed to do that. So I'm perfectly fine meeting on a pretty regular basis, and just hope that it has good form and we can keep answering a lot of these questions. Yeah.
Great. And we see that there's a number of questions, I think, in the chat that, Jeffrey, if you want to take a moment and look at, my sense is most of these, some of them are comments, but if there's any questions that you want to type your answer to, you have access to just click on type answer.
Sure.
And then others of them, I think, are things you would have to, investigate further, right? You don't necessarily have the answers at the moment, but
yeah,
just want to offer that opportunity for you to take on.
Yeah. David, do you have one last thing?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. Census data shows 12,397 housing units on Nantucket.
Okay. So there are a tenth, one in 10 are an active short-term rental.
12% maybe.
It just from our data. Again, if there's more data out there, that might be higher. So that's roughly where we're at. Yeah.
Great.
Can I ask Julia what their data shows them for the same question?
Sure. We look at it differently because we didn't look at housing units. Household units are what I think what Dave quoted is so you could have multiple household units in, let's say, one home. And in fact, on Nantucket, that happens probably more than in maybe the average municipality in Massachusetts, certainly. So I think it's, I don't want to quote it incorrectly, but it's a lower number of residential properties. So is it like 9,600 or something like that? So that then it becomes a higher percentage, obviously.
Yeah, that's what I'm interested in, the percentage, yeah.
Yeah, I want to be a little careful about, everybody sort of offering different data in the group. And so just to say, right, it's fine that you asked Julia that question, but my hope is that in order to, as we sort of talked about, to make sure that all information is salient and legitimate and credible to all, that is one of the reasons the data subgroup is a good place to have those discussions. And then we can try and present to the full group data that is sort of agreed upon rather than different people's, competing data, right? We would kind of want to avoid. So, okay, well, with that, thank you very much, Jeffrey. And, for those who asked, we will be posting Jeffrey's slides presentation. So Jeffrey, if you could send that to Samanish and myself,
Sure.
we'll make sure that gets posted to the website. Like all of our materials will be put there.
Yep.
So I want to now turn to a discussion of the revised operating protocols. So let me pull up the revised version, and this I think was sent out to all of you and was posted on the website. So just so you see in sort of red line the things that have changed. One is just noting that we may or may not be done by 2023 annual town meeting. I just crossed off others here because there aren't others. If we want to add others, we should just add them. There was a suggestion that there were some concerns raised about the sort of participatory role of the at-large alternate. And so my suggestion was to just shift that we invite the at-large alternate to share their perspective as we move to the public comment period. So that way we do give them a voice, given that they will have a vote. If others are not there, we want to make sure that they have some time prior to that to at least say, that, he has that opportunity to share how he's thinking about things. But that being said, that's an opportunity he would have whether it's in the ground rules or not, because once we get to public comment, the alternates, like the public, are welcome to speak. So really all this does is explicitly invite him to do so. So that was my best attempt at trying to find a middle ground there that recognizes the unique role that the at-large alternate is in, but also address people's concerns about having too many voices active in the meeting or going against what they felt was the intent of the selection committee when they put certain people in alternate roles and others in membership roles. And then, as I think we all know, there were concerns raised about H and I. This piece here is new, so you haven't seen it. So this was not, I didn't recommend this change prior to this meeting, but we can talk through this now. But we can talk about the concern that has been raised about H and I and a potential way to change I. And I have some other potential options for that as well. And then the only other changes I think were adding in that the group can form subgroups that will also meet according to open meeting law. I put in the group's website that all meeting materials will be posted there. And then just noted that the work plan is tentative and that things might change, especially we sort of learned that, to meet warrant article review requirements, and or maybe we just keep going past this time because we're not done in time for the 2023 town meeting. So those were the changes we made. So let me start up here first, and then we will get down to the H and I question. If there's any comments on any of the changes other than H and I here. Okay, hearing none. Let's talk for a minute about H&I. So, as I think I mentioned at the last meeting, the purpose of these ground rules, these particular provisions, is to try to promote collaboration and build trust and ensure that all parties are fully invested in trying to reach a consensus solution. It was my understanding when I was brought in to this process that people were concerned about biased messaging and divisive language that had led up to and persisted past the previous round of town meeting. That said, we have heard, at least those of you who are on the newsletter or have read this in one of the papers. If you have not, we've been informed that the Act Now group does not agree to follow these ground rules. We've gotten advice from the town's attorney to the point that we cannot demand that parties follow these ground rules. These are typically voluntary ground rules that people can agree to, and they're not legally binding. And so this group also does not have the authority to ask people to step down from this group. That is the sole job of the selection committee. So the selection committee can choose to try to alter the membership, but that is not within the auspices of this group to do. So the group has a couple of choices. One option is that we eliminate the highlighted portions or all of H&I completely, and that everybody is welcome then to do whatever type of messaging, lobbying, competing articles, competing messages about what it is that's going on in this group becomes open to all. That's one option. A second option is that we have that we eliminate H and we have some amount of agreement about communication. If that would be up to Act Now, if that's something you could live with, that at the very least, there's an agreement that everybody is very clear about. There is official communication about what happened in these meetings. We have meeting summaries. Everybody agrees to any communication they're going to send to their constituents to first give our actual official information before providing their own commentary, and to make sure that they're really clear that their commentary is only their commentary. It does not represent what has happened in the group as a whole, or the views of the group as a whole, or the actual occurrence of what happened for the group as a whole. So that's another possibility. A third possibility is that all the members of the group, aside from Act Now, agree to follow H&I as they were originally written, and that we just write in the ground rules that Act Now has chosen not to sign on to those ground rules, but that everybody else is going to agree to not do competing messaging or competing articles. And you know, that messaging can come from the group. So the public will understand that there is, you know, that Act Now's messages are only Act Now's, but the rest of the group is really all going to work together collaboratively on messaging and on their warrant article. A fourth option is that you can all go to, separately from all these options, anybody can go to the selection group and ask them to do whatever you want to ask them to do. But a fourth option is that, this group could disband because people feel that it's unable to achieve its mission without being able to have these ground rules in place. So you may have other options that you want to put forward. Those were the four that occurred to me. But I now want to open it up for comment. So Peter.
Well, I'm a little upset with the response that we got back. I think if you look at any other type of negotiation, unions, et cetera, when you're into a final group and you're trying to come up with a contract, you don't go out advertising about it. You try to get it solved. And I don't believe that just because Act Now is ringing their bell, that we should, we should allow them to have this kind of power over the group. It's wrong. Whether I agree with them or not agree with them, it's just wrong. They should not have that much power. And it gives them a disproportionate amount of power any way we do it. If we just allow the group to be one group and they do their own thing, gives them a disproportionate amount of power, give them 50% instead of 1/9, what they should have. So my recommendation is that we go to the select board and we ask the select board to change the rules.
Okay, thanks, Peter. David.
Thank you. Listen, I heard the whole group, last meeting, state unequivocally that they thought that this was a non-starter. This was referred from town meeting by the citizens of town for us to resolve this in a work group. And I think that we owe that to the citizens of Nantucket. If there's one member that doesn't want to play by the rules that the rest of us want to play with, I suggest that we move on and keep following this path, because this is what the voters wanted. If there's a standout here, they're going to be standing out on their own. And I think that and if any false messaging comes from this, from that other entity, I think it is our job as a group to identify it and deal with it as it happens, but move towards our goal. I do not think we should dissolve the group. I don't think we should try to have them kicked out. I personally, my personal opinion is that they're doing their best to undermine this process. And I think that to address that, we should move forward and be transparent and respond. Thank you.
David. Kathy.
I think that leaving H and I are really, really important for us to move forward. The way they were originally stated in here, I'm not sure where they came from, but I agree with them. And we're perfectly willing to pass along the message without any other kind of messaging needed, because what we're talking about now is putting out facts and things that we are agreeing as a consensus. And so therefore we're in support of that. If that's the consensus from this group, that's what we will be messaging. So I think it's really important not to have the distraction of challenging or putting another warrant article out there. I think that we need to spend the time to do this right, get the data that we need, and I think we're making great strides toward that. I would be really, really disappointed if the group fell apart. So I agree with Dave Iverson that we need to keep the rules the way they were and move forward and be able to correct any misinformation that somebody may be putting out there about us, because I think that that needs to be out. We need to be out there making sure that we're not being maligned or thought badly of, or thought that we're not doing our mission. And perhaps if there is a need, again, I don't know who would have the authority to do this, but if the group feels there's a need that we need to have Act Now not be here, and I'm not saying that's my opinion, But if that's what the group believe, perhaps another representative that is against STRs would be appropriate to put in place, just so that this is, as long as it's a party that's willing to contribute and talk and go to consensus. I think all of us are volunteers in this, except for Act Now, who that's a paid position to be defending or putting public policy out there for Act Now. So it may be very impossible for them, the way they're organized, to not insist that H and I be gone. But I just wanted to say that we feel very strongly that they need to stay and stay as they are, and let's just move forward and get this resolved. There's lots of places in the middle where we all can meet. I truly believe that. Thank you.
Kathy. Julia.
Thanks, Stacy. We're not in any way trying to get this group disbanded or, taken apart or whatever. That's not the goal of this. I think what you heard at town meeting last year is that people want to see this issue resolved. That's why we're all here. It's the first time I've ever seen it, and I've mentioned this at the last meeting, that these types of ground rules being presented to a local body. And it's, I understand some of the spirit, and I appreciate, Stacy, what you wrote in I think that that's perfectly acceptable, frankly. And in fact, it gives a clearer way to communicate with people, a more standard way, and allows for, sharing of opinion, which is, the reality is, like, most people can't show up at these 3-hour meetings, and they rely on their own sources, whether it's, Act Now or somebody else, to provide a summary, a synopsis of their own, not just what the group puts out. And so I think that what you suggest for language there is fine, if this group would be willing to work with that. And we do want to be positive, contributors to this work group, and especially, given how long we've been working on this topic, that's why we're on this work group. That I hope that's why we got appointed to it. And H is a really tough one, because, as I mentioned, it's, there's what I read in the paper today also is that there's questions around, and I think some of us were wondering as well, like, is this group going to be able to get to something by 2023? Which is, I really think, one of the tasks that the voters sent us here to do. So, if this group can agree to set aside H from these protocols and get to work, then we can absolutely agree with I.
Rewritten, you mean? The way
Correct.
it's rewritten here. Yeah. It's John.
Yeah, so I sat through the last 2 years of town meetings, and when Julia says, the voters wanted to get the SDR issue resolved, that is true. But what they also wanted was what they saw as, rightly or wrongly, 2 polarized groups to stop acting that way and to come together and, as a work group, work this thing out. And personally, I think it's very sad that one of those polarizing groups cannot accept the rules as written. I think that's very sad, and people will draw their own conclusions from that. But I agree with David and with Kathy that let's just keep it as it was originally written, and let's just move on. And I would not be in favor of in any way trying to have, Act Now removed from the group. But I don't think we should change the wording. And let's just, let the rest of us just, let's take the high road and try to get this thing done.
John, Mary.
So I'm not voting, obviously, so I'm going to tell you exactly what I think. It seems like people are being a little bit bullying towards Act Now in this group. And I think that there are quite a number of people in this group who would benefit from nothing coming out of this work group this year or maybe ever, because then nothing would change and they would benefit from whatever their stake is in this. But I mean, I think this is one section and we're all private citizens. And so any one of us could bring something to town meeting. So I just think, what if we don't, I mean, what if we are spending so much time talking about language that the chances of us have something for January are pretty low. So I don't really think we should be preventing public citizens or saying that they're, not good organizations. I just am not really impressed with the way some of the language that's been used. I'm not involved in any group. I'm just from the Board of Health, but I just does not sit well with me the way this is going.
Thanks. Peter?
Let me get some clarity for those of us who don't know. I want to have a better understanding of the timeline here. In other words, what is the final time for us to come to a proposed resolution that could make it to the 2023 town meeting?
Megan, can you answer that for us? Give us your best information on that.
Yes, so after the warrant closes to citizen articles, I believe that deadline is November the 14th. The select board essentially controls the warrant, so it would be up to them whether or not they would accept an article to be included with the warrant. That said, any zoning related articles would be required to go through a series of public hearings through the planning board. So early to mid-December would really be kind of the cutting it close deadline for zoning related articles.
Well, since we've been tasked with we're tasked with zoning here, so I mean, as a practical matter, I mean, for the purposes of this discussion, one can assume that we will not come up, whatever it is we come up with will not be part of the 2023 town meeting. That said, I tend to agree with the others. Let's just move forward. I think the point can be made, if Act Now comes forward with a proposal that people in this group don't believe in and don't support, then it'll be made clear that that we're still working, and that the facts will will be out there, and people can make their own decisions based on that. But it is unfortunate, but it is what it is, and I think we move on.
Thanks, Peter. Karen?
So my thoughts are, I was hoping that we could all come together and agree that we were going to all put our efforts into this, and it's disappointing to hear that there might be some other outside things. It seems like it's hard to understand how that works well with the group process itself, but I think Act Now needs to be at the table. And so if we need to move forward with those circumstances, I can understand it. I do have concerns about the consensus process and how that plays out over time. And I'm, if, for example, Act Now comes out and has another proposal, then how does that fit into the consensus regarding ours? And maybe, Stacy, we could just clarify how that consensus would happen if, or what the options would be for that if the group comes up with a product that Act Now is gonna go in a different direction and not support, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, the setup from the town's framework for this group defines consensus as 7 votes out of 9. So what that would mean is if there's a competing proposal out there, and there's 1 or 2 members of this group that are supporting that instead, if we still have 7 members of this group supporting a proposal that if there's a proposal that 7 members of this group can support, then it will be brought as the town's, not as a citizen's petition, but as the town's solution, is my understanding, right? Coming out of this work group that has been chartered by the town. But it still goes to town meeting. Yeah.
I don't know if this is possible to do quickly, but I'm wondering, Stacy, if you could give any history as to why this kind of policy might be put into place in group decision making in general. Is there anything that you could offer on that would be helpful for us to understand?
Why H&I, or why I put those in there to begin with?
Why those types of things are often done when groups are trying to make decisions and come together.
Yeah. So let me start with I think the reason that that's there is the public can be very confused about what's really happening in meetings, and you know, groups that disagree with each other can at times weaponize messaging to the public during a process in a way that makes it much harder for people, for the public to really understand what's really happening in the group, and B, for members of the group to really build trust in each other, because you know, they're being quoted or misquoted or quoted out of context, or the public is being told they said something, you know, different from what they think they said. In general, even attributing specific comments to people rather than in general, as you saw that our minutes tend to do. The goal of that is to really try to separate the people from the problem so that we can collectively get everybody's good ideas. And, you know, human beings have this way of, oh, I want to know who said something because then I'll know whether it's a good idea or not. There's actually a lot of research on what we call motivated reasoning, or identity-based cognition. This is not a slam on anybody in particular. We all do this. It's a human design flaw. And a lot of research has sort of showed that, right? You show people policy ideas, you tell them this is a policy idea from someone you trust, and people say, wow, that's a great policy idea. You show the same person the same policy idea, you tell them that it's from a person that they already mistrust, and they say, this is an evil, terrible policy idea, right? So there's lots of research that shows that this is true. And these are some of the dynamics that make consensus building hard. It makes it much harder to come to agreement among people where especially conflict or the issues have become somewhat entrenched, and there are already groups that people have sort of picked their team and their group, and that's the team or the group they believe in, that they root for. The goal of a process like this is to try to reset that. Let's come together around a shared problem. Let's focus on the problem. Let's focus on good ideas, no matter who brings up those good ideas, right? And let's try to get the public focused on good ideas, no matter who brings up those good ideas. And let's try to, you know, make sure that the information that goes to the public is neutral, is unbiased, is not slanted toward one direction or another, right? That's really the idea behind I. That provision has been part of every process that I have worked on in my 23 years doing this work, from municipal up to the international level, on, you know, on the federal level, on the whatever it might be. So it's not to say that, you know, again, we don't have the legal right to and it can't be enforced legally. No one can sue you if you break it, right? It's really a voluntary set of norms that promote successful outcomes for diverse perspective groups. For H, I think it kind of speaks for itself, right? If we're trying to come up with a consensus here, and especially if we think we might not be done in time for town meeting, well, then having an alternative from one group's perspective, or even worse, 2 or 3 different ones from 2 or 3 different groups' perspectives going on. It's very hard for the public to trust in the work that's going on in this group. It kind of, it goes against the real point of all coming together to trying to come to a solution together. So that's the purpose behind H&I. Peter?
Yeah, I think we should, number one is we should really come to grips with the fact that we're probably not going to make it for town meeting. We could ask the select board for a special town meeting, which would be like in the spring, or later, oh, not sorry, in the fall, like October or September. And we should have that as our goal, because to go forward with us trying to rush through anything, I think is silly. But my fear is this. My fear is that we don't present at town meeting, and Act Now does present something at town meeting. And that's the problem with this whole thing. They can totally bypass what we're doing by just putting an article out if we don't have an article ready by town meeting. So that's kind of saying that we have to rush to get something to compete with our own selves. And that's why I don't think it's a proper thing to do. And I don't know the alternative, but going forward, we're leaving ourselves wide open to that.
Kathy?
I just wanted to, to reiterate that, that we don't have any solutions to put forward. We want to hear everyone's ideas. We have some ideas that might work and might not work, but we don't want to be distracted by having to continually respond to attacks, or respond to misstatements, or respond to misquotes, or respond to any of those things. I don't think any one of us wants to do that. And I think we, we need to go into the process with open minds, with open hearts, lay down the weapons, we call it a truce, and let the process happen. And it's not going to be well thought out, I agree with Peter, if we try to rush into it. Our starting time was delayed from when the framework originally said it was supposed to begin. And that, that's just the way things happen. But if we try to go put something forward without any data, then we are really hurting ourselves. And then the other thing is that having the lawsuit against the town and against some of our neighbors continue on is continually a threat to those people for neighbor versus neighbor lawsuits. So we do really want to move forward as quickly as we can to get something in the zoning that protects people from lawsuits as well. So there's a lot of folks who also, I think, are just really afraid to speak out because they feel that whatever they say might be used against them, with their neighbors, with like year-round people and people who have lived many years part-time. You don't want to, there are friends that you've had for years and that are year-rounders, and we want to all work together. There's never been a division that I felt here in all the years, in all the decades I've been here. And I hate that now. I just think we'd be all so much better off if all that, just let it go for 6 months, let it go until we have a consensus from this group and we show that we can do it. It's really hard, but I want to have Julia in this process. I don't want to have something from the outside doing different than what we're doing. I think we need to just move forward together and come up with something that we can all live with. And we haven't gotten to the point where we've decided we can't do that yet. So don't undermine it is my request. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.
I agree with a lot of the things that have been said. I think we do have to think about a special town meeting, perhaps September. I think that will give us the time to finish up what we need by March or April, and then have it go through the necessary steps. I think H&I are good, but I think Act Now is very important to our group. I respect the work they've done. I agree with much of it, not all of it. I like the work they're doing. I wish they didn't feel the need to come up perhaps with their own article, but obviously that's something they can do if they want to. It makes me sad to think of that. I definitely think we should move forward. I think it makes sense to have the other members of us, if a vote to abide by H&I. I'm fine with the new I also. I think that's good if that's better for Act Now. And I'm not trying to make things hard for Act Now. As I said, I respect Act Now. But, and I just want to add one other thing. I thought Grant Sanders made a great comment in the public comments last time that we need to keep it relatively simple. Perhaps we could, for instance, year-rounders have the right to STRs, commercial interests are limited as much as possible. Perhaps we could make a statement at town meeting, because we probably won't have something, but that's the direction we're going in, but there's a lot of details we have to work out and make sure they're legally enforceable, well-defined, and can stand the test of time. And that this is where we're going, and ask people to hold off for a special town meeting. So I say, yes, let's move forward. Let's the others, 8 of us, if necessary, agree to abide by these rules. It's okay to change I think. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. David?
Hi, thank you. Yeah, I think, again, I think that we need to take the high road and move on and move forward and hope that cool heads prevail and nobody does anything that's really going to impact us terribly. And I'm just going to say this because Kathy Baird brought it up. Since we've started this work group, there's been another lawsuit added in, and there's one in the works. So before we end, there's going to be 3 lawsuits total. So I think that we need to, that should weigh on our minds at some level. I also think that if we can't get something for this town meeting, I don't think a special town meeting is a bad idea, but we shouldn't forget that through 39, that the select board and the Board of Health has the ability to regulate through bylaws. So if we can get some data, we can agree on some data, agree on some definitions. I think that that's a possibility as well, is to approach the select board with maybe some interim regulations that'll make the locals feel, or make everyone involved feel like we are moving forward and we're making some important headway. So I think there's a couple different ways we can go at that to make sure that everyone that's interested in this realizes that we are moving forward and we are making progress. Thank you.
Julia?
I'll let John go first, if that's okay.
John?
Yeah, so just really going on from what Peter and Kathy and David said, what I was thinking today was, this is a very special kind of town meeting situation that sort of happened earlier this year. So I just wonder if first of all, I think the sooner we make it public that we are going to need extra time, and therefore it's likely to be September for a special meeting. The sooner we do that, the better, so that we're controlling the messaging and not reacting to a headline that says, this group missed their deadline, something like that. So the sooner the better to do that, to get the messaging out so that it's our messaging. And then the second thing is, I wonder if we could, going on from what Jim was saying, I wonder if at the town meeting, though, we could do really an update to the town on where we are, not just a couple of things. Here's what here's where we're at. These are the things that we're already looking really good. These are the things we're still working on. And just take the time. We're not looking for a vote, but take the time to give anyone who is interested enough to be at the town meeting an update. And I know that's not what the town meeting is really about, but neither is this subject. It's very, it's a special situation. And so that would be my suggestion, that we get in front of the messaging about timing and really think about whether we could do a more formal update to the town meeting in April, May. Thank you.
Yeah, can I ask a question about that? Because a lot of municipalities have their committees or boards or work groups provide reports to town meeting. And although I think early mid-December seems highly unlikely, you know, it may be that by May, it won't be early enough to have it for a vote for town meeting, right? But this group may reach consensus by the time town meeting comes around, even though it's too late to get into the warrant for the town meeting. So I guess that is my question is, you know, does that ever happen in Nantucket that boards or committees give reports to town meeting? Megan?
The avenue in which boards and committees give reports is through a paper copy of the annual report. So we can check in with town administration to see if we might be included to submit a section into that report. In terms of a verbal update, I think that's something I have not seen before, and we'd have to run that by the town moderator.
Okay. Julia, did you have something you wanted to say?
I just wanted to say that I appreciate the fact that you would all, you know, allow us to continue on and to cooperate and participate in this group without, you know, relinquishing some of these rights that we see as important. And that, you know, the reality is that coming to grips with this timeline is, John said, is pretty important because whether it's, you know, our group or another group or an individual, I mean, we run the risk of having an STR article or multiple. That's just the reality.
All right, so we've had vibrant discussion here. I think what I heard most was keep H and I as they are. Ask for a vote from the group for the ground rules. And then, yeah, they cannot be enforced legally. So if Act Now chooses not to follow those ground rules, the group continues on, but everybody else will, you know, nonetheless, those who vote to approve the ground rules will do so, and they will be the ground rules, and the group will continue on. I think that's what I heard as the majority suggestion. So maybe can I ask for a vote on that? If people agree, keep H and I as they are, accept the other changes. So take out my new change to I, though, of course, I'm sure that it would be appreciated by the group to, you know, if one is not going to, if one is going to attribute statements to others or present, you know, present their own view of what happened at a meeting, they will also share the official meeting information. I think that would probably be appreciated by all. So given that, if people want to raise their hands, do you agree that we keep H and I as originally they are? The other changes to the ground rules as you saw them in the version I sent out last week, and we approve the ground rules as a group. Can you, yeah, either raise your physical hand or your virtual hand, whichever you prefer. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 hands raised. Yeah, or maybe I can't see Dave's hand, but because he's not in my window. But
My hand is raised.
So
Dave
9.
Iverson.
So yeah, so eight yeses on this. So the ground rules are approved, and the group will move forward. Great. Let us now.
Sorry, Stacy.
Yes.
Peter, can I just confirm, Peter S., that you had your hand up?
Yes, of course.
Okay, great, thank you.
Okay. So moving on to, John, was there something else you wanted to say, or did you just?
No, sorry.
That's okay. I want to now turn to public comment. So Semanish, can we make sure that the attendees can raise their hands?
Yep, they'll be able to do it, unmute as they raise their hands.
Okay, great. And I just want to get a sense of, oh, John, we were going to turn to you first. Yes, so why don't we turn first? Thank you for reminding me. We're going to turn to you, and then we'll also turn to other alternates who have raised their hands. So, John.
Well, thank you very much, Stacy. Again, my apologies that I've lost my voice because of COVID, but we'll get through it. I don't want to take a lot of time because I really want to hear public comment. I'm honored to be an at-large alternate. I listen carefully to all three of our at-large members, and I can identify with so much of what they said tonight. And I certainly appreciate the hard work of all members of this committee. I'm impressed with the thoughtfulness that people are bringing to this. There's a lot of data. I'm very data driven, and there's a lot of data that we need to collect, assemble, and digest. And I want to thank Jeffrey for his role in that, and Stacy, particularly to you for running what I think is one of the better. I'm in a lot of meetings, but you're doing a great job. So with that, let me just shut up because I'd rather hear from others.
Thanks, John. Robin.
Hi, thanks. So as this discussion was going on, my phone was blowing up, as they say. And I had a number of comments from people who found it extraordinary. They understood the context of trying to move forward, but found it extraordinary that for one member out of 13 for Act Now, there would be an exception to H&I in terms of reaching consensus versus all the others. And part of that is the context of there is only one member on the group that's salaried to pursue their position. And there's only one member of the group that is both supporting and providing funding for lawsuits against the town of Nantucket and against neighbors, only one. So I was a bit surprised when Mary said that members were bullying Act Now, when the perception of many on island is the opposite has occurred, and to some that Act Now has bullied the group into getting an exception for H&I, whereas everyone else agrees to conform to it. So I just wanted to make that observation that seems to be shared by many other people watching what's going on this evening.
Yeah, thanks, Robin. I just want to say to the group, this has been a difficult situation and conversation. And we need to now, if we're going to be successful, we need to double down on our own ground rules. And that is to speak about, if we're going to speak about other people, we're going to do it with utmost respect. We're all going to treat each other with the kind of respect that we'd like to be treated with. And I'm not saying anybody has not done that, but it's going to be more important now, right? Because I know that feelings are raw about where things stand. Act Now and Julia are acting within their legal rights, and the group is acting within its rights to request participation in these voluntary ground rules, but they cannot require them. And so, that is where we are, and the group has agreed to accept that and to move on. And now let's do that in a way that's really as respectful as we possibly can. Okay. I'm going to turn now to our members of the public. It looks like we have 4 people who want to speak. So if I can ask you to just try to limit your comment to 2 minutes. And we'll call to
You can't hear whatever going on. We can't hear.
Yeah. Yeah, we can hear you now. We can hear you.
You have to, you have the ability to talk, but you have to unmute yourself.
You're back on mute. Can you, yep, there you go. Try now.
Bob speaking. Is that who's I'm recognized?
Yes,
Yes.
you are recognized.
Thank you. Bob Vidoni here. And first of all, I'd like to thank all of you who have volunteered your time and energy to this very difficult task. And also I'd like to thank the moderator for bringing your indispensable skills to the table. We've been on Nantucket since 1999. For 23 years, we have rented our home to families, many multi-generational. We would not be here otherwise. We consider ourselves a part of this community and highly value the relationships we have formed with full-time residents and business owners over the years. We also recognize all of the concerns that are mentioned by all the parties, the fragility of the island, traffic, the environment, water, sewer, roads, climate change. We're deeply concerned about the housing crisis. It appears that some, if not many, that people that we have talked to, as well as our good friends, it seems like it's a foregone conclusion in some people's minds that all the problems, except for climate change, it's the direct result of short-term rentals. I have to say, I've been reticent to speak up in this forum. Last meeting, I didn't want to speak. We have dear friends that are year-round residents in the community, and I fear damaging our relationships because this has become extremely divisive. It's very disheartening. Make no mistake, a wedge is being placed into this community. A division is being created between seasonal residents who do not need to rent and seasonal residents who do need to do so. If this continues and the lawsuits being brought against individual homeowners in the town results in all short-term rentals being deemed as illegal commercial operations in a residential neighborhood, the result will be a disaster for the economy. And the people that are going to be hurt the most, are the year-round people who have to rent their homes to stay here. Is this what we really want? A result that will force seasonal residents like us to sell our house to the highest bidder and leave the island? Our house will not become affordable housing. A free market dictates that. Do we really want a result that will push out working people who own their homes and need to rent to be able to pay the bills and force them to throw in the towel and leave the island? It will take a united community to figure out how to deal with these issues, not a fractured community. I hope this work group can help heal rather than divide and demonize. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. Scott Wilson. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, thank you, Stacy. I just wanted to say that with respect to Act Now, they were asked to join this committee because they were an early and firm advocate for a certain position on the issue. And to ask them to waive their right to continue to pursue the issue through a warrant at the town meeting is totally unfair. I don't understand it. And I really wish people would rethink that. You're asking them to waive a right to pursue policy change as a member of this committee in a situation where the town wanted them on the committee so that they could express that very position. Thank you.
Thank you. We're back to Haim.
Hi, Stacy. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm also in the category of a short-term rental owner operator. I've owned a property on Nantucket for 7 years. I've rented it just for the summer season for 6 of those years. I use the property myself spring and fall. I believe that I'm part of the vast majority of responsible, caring, short-term rental owner operators on the island who have a deep, profound connection and love of the island and our time spent there. And I certainly have and exercise a commitment to very carefully work with my renters to absolutely minimize the chance that someone is going to come to the island and not behave in a way that shows respect for the community and the environment, and is really appreciating the wonderful things about the island and not disregarding that. So I hope that, if nothing else, the data process that Granicus is going to bring to the table, which I was very impressed to hear about, will help differentiate that there are a really tiny minority of short-term rental owner operators who are in this demonized category of these corporate commercial entities. I mean, I myself, my property is held in an LLC for a whole bunch of tax and financial planning and estate planning reasons. But that doesn't mean I'm just have one little old house, a very small house that as I say, I'm very careful in how I rent it because I don't want renters coming in and hurting and damaging my house, not to mention the community. On a second, much more geeky point, the conversation about getting to information about impact on island real estate agencies and the rental market. Massachusetts has a whole bunch of that data. When I, as an individual owner operator, registered and got a certificate, I had to provide that information to Verbo, which is the only platform I use, but I still manage them really carefully, and the 3 real estate agencies on island that I permit to do rentals. So every month, all of the entities participating in this have to report to Massachusetts. Here is the income and tax reporting per intermediary for my property. So that data is out there. I'd like to hope the town of Nantucket can obtain it and provide it to Granicus. I appreciate it is not public data, so it wouldn't otherwise be accessible to Granicus, but I think that's something that should be pursued. And I think the town would want this anyhow, so you can make sure the town's getting its fair share of the reporting. Anyhow, with that, I will conclude my remarks. Again, thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. And we have more people hands, so just so we can all get on to our dinner before too long, I do try to keep your comments to 2 minutes if you can. Brooke Gibbs.
Hi there. I have an MBA and an MSc in economics, and I've been watching this happen my whole life. And it's unbelievable, and yet it's perfect because you can see the greed everywhere. And we're never going to agree on this because it's all about money, whether it's to keep us living here or if it's to keep us above water or if it's to keep us as rich as we are and seek out more money someday. It's all about money. So the non-economic solution to this is to look at how many people we have here that we need to have here to sustain the community first, and then worry about appeasing everyone else and their interests second. We're not really, we're not making any progress in this work group. It's going to be 6 weeks. We're going to get a bunch of data and we're going to compile together as fast as we can and offer it to the public and hope that they stomach what little we can do in a couple of months. The bigger solution is to determine how many service people of each industry we need here on the island, both year round and seasonally, to supply the services that we need, and then go from there and say, okay, we have a sustainable community that we can, people aren't being pushed out by greed or being pushed out by circumstance or being pushed out by people willing to pay more money than they are because they provide a vital service. So basically what your research needs to be is finding a way to find the number of units that can be rented and rent from there in proportion to the amount of need of the community to sustain itself. Because we're wasting our time arguing back and forth from the realtor point of view to the local point of view to the seasonal point of view to the out-of-towner point of view to the long-term whatever. we're all just going to categorize each other and make this an argument back and forth and discuss particulars. You need to look at the core of the community and what it takes to sustain the community. And that's what should come first, not personal interest, not personal income, not numbers or money, because in the end, your bank account is not on your headstone, and you need to live like you live on Nantucket as an example to the rest of the people around you, and stop living for money. That's the bottom line here. Thank you.
Penelope. You have to unmute yourself.
Sorry, yeah, sorry about
Penelope
that.
Day.
Hi, it's Penny Dye, and I am the current president of the Nantucket Association of Real Estate Brokers. I have 4 comments and then a quick question. When Mr. Goodman was making his presentation, there was a reference to quantitative data, and it largely included so far non-local data. The most important thing I think right now is to have qualitative data, and it has to include local data from the real estate companies and not just the online platforms. I, with confidence, can posit that the local data exceeds that of the online booking platforms. And then that should be then supplemented with local government data. There was a reference on one of his lens application charts to a line that said renter/ownership/LLC. Just to reiterate, an LLC is simply a legal form of ownership. In many cases, it's an individual. It is not commercial. It is a legal form of ownership. On the state registry, it's an opt-in registry, not opt-out. There are many fewer rental listings on the market than there were a few years ago. Much of what was sold during the pandemic years, 2020 or 2020 and 2021, are properties that are now being used by the new owners and are no longer renting. My last comment has to do with the reporting. Once the local registry is in place, I suspect that people who have complaints will not suffer in silence, but will happily report any perceived issues. And my question is, have you yet defined what the issues and problems are that we're hoping to address with this group? Thank you.
Thanks, Penny. Ronald Cocut.
Yes, well, am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Oh, thank you very much. My name is Ron Cocat. I have been a seasonal resident of Tom Nevers for 40 years. And first, I would like to reiterate every comment that the first public speaker made. I didn't catch his name, but I wholeheartedly agree with every word he said. Secondly, my one comment is I would like to go back to the opening discussion on the goals for the committee. And the first goal is the one to prevent or reverse the loss of year-round housing due to STRs. There was quite a bit of discussion about that. And I think that impact of STRs on year-round rentals has from day one of this whole activity been a key point. And I've not quite seen that in 40 years. And one reason I have not quite seen that is because when I first bought a house on Nantucket, there were about 5,000 seasonal residents. This is data that I've never heard from anyone involved in this discussion. Today, I believe the recent census said there are over 12,000 year-round residents on the island. So I'm wondering, has the year-round resident population, who obviously has housing available to them of some kind, they seem to have grown faster than the seasonal resident population. And it just seems like consistency to me. I don't know the answer, but I think it's a pair of numbers worth exploring. And the final comment that I have is regarding the Granicus data. I only rent my house to single families, no more than 6 people. And I've done it for 40 years through realtors. I don't use Airbnb or any of the VRBO or any of those folks. even though they're much cheaper, and I would get more money from in on a net basis. The realtors do take responsibility on the island, I think. So I find it hard to believe from the pie chart that was presented, I find it hard to believe that few rentals go through island realtors. So as the previous commenter said, we really need some data from island realtors as well. And I wish you all luck and thank you all for devoting the amount of time you're devoting to solving this issue. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ron. Rick Atherton.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
We can.
Just, if I might, one observation for really the committee members. I think people who are listening are interested, paying attention to all the issues. But I would share with you each as a member of the process that I think it's usually pretty transparent, sort of where you're coming from by listening to your comments. I don't want to say I know where you're going necessarily, but I think there's a general perception that people can draw from the kinds of questions you ask or raise about the organizational process of the committee, and how they suggest how you individually want the outcome to proceed. So I just ask us all to be a little careful about that. I think it's an observation I'm making, and I doubt that I'm alone. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rick. Charity.
Thank you very much. I have found this an extremely informative session. I want to agree with Brooke earlier. As a demographer and economist and a business owner, I am very, very encouraged by what I heard from Jeffrey Goodman in his Granicus presentation, particularly referring to himself as a data scientist, and also addressing residual issues such as infrastructure impact and that sort of thing. But I also want to point out that in my long career in Washington and any other legislative process, I have never come across a negotiation where any organization or individual has been asked to relinquish their First Amendment rights. And I think that is insulting, and I think it should raise serious warnings for the community of Nantucket. Nantucket Island has turned into Nantucket Inc. And everybody, as that earlier gentleman said, is at the trough feeding off of it. So I would hope that in addition to addressing the issues that you outlined earlier, you would seriously investigate how you're going to deal with corporate ownership and that how that can be controlled in the short-term rental proposals that you make. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Grant.
Hi, everyone. Stacy, I really appreciated your comments and your instruction to the group about how we speak about one another. It's so important that we speak respectfully about one another. But I love the presentation by Jeffrey Goodman, and I really love the data portion of it, but I would hope that the group could keep one thing in mind, and that is that the data is never static. It's not a snapshot. There are trend lines here that are leading to some situations that we may not want to experience as a community. And so as you do your hard work, and I appreciate the work that everybody's doing, I would hope that you would ask questions about trend lines You know, think like Wayne Gretzky. Don't skate to where the puck is. Let's skate to where the puck's going to be, and make sure that we understand what actions we can take to change these trend lines that are leading to places where we may not want to be as a community. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Henry.
Thank you all so much. Apologies for any whining babies in the background. I'm holding a tiny little one. I guess I just want to emphasize the availability of a lot of the data that you're looking for. I've been outspoken before, but I'll keep this brief. If you look into our tax records, Rob Rainey, the assessor, he can give you ownership for every year from the past 20 years. And those will give you trend lines that are much more meaningful in terms of who is owning what, and especially how long people own things for. I think is really important for people to understand. When I did my research, it showed pretty simply that over the past 10 years, Nantucket Building Department, and our building essentially has been focused on building second homes. During this time, our population, census, regardless, I think it's much more than 12,000, almost doubled. What happens when your population doubles and you only build second and third homes? So I guess that's where I am concerned about the goal of short-term rentals being focused on housing, because besides a report done by Act Now, we've never seen data, especially with the current census, updated, like, how many houses were built, who's using those houses. And I guess when it comes to loss of year-round housing, what does it matter if it's a short-term rental or a house that someone's not going to use? I mean, I think that's a pretty important question. If someone's selling their house and it's going from year-round to short-term rental or seasonal, and we're talking about the loss of year-round housing, well, what's the difference? I mean, it's not going to be year-round housing either way. So, I just think that in a way, short-term rentals have kind of been pinned as the cause of many problems. But as someone in the sales industry for real estate, it's overwhelming. I mean, our clients mostly prefer not to rent. I have a listing right now that is a short-term rental, and the people who are interested in it are majority not interested in renting. That's one story, but I think it just shows that if you talk to people who are in the industry and you start correlating sales data, which again is open to the public, it's right there in the land bank records, it's right there in the building department files, you're going to start seeing that we are dominated as a second home industry. And is the way out of this housing problem by banning short-term rentals or highly restricting them, I should say, or restricting them at all? Or are we just going to restrict an economy and there's still going to be a problem of people overwhelmingly wanting a second or third or fourth home on Nantucket, which when it comes to price points, short-term rentals only go up to a certain level. Like there's a price at which it no longer economically has a value proposition. And when you're talking about maybe larger landowners who are local and are then selling to someone who's going to make a second home or a subdivision, how does that contribute to the loss of year-round housing? Not just people who have to rent their homes in order to buy them. So I think, I just emphasize
Thanks, Henry.
that.
Sorry.
Sorry, the data's there. Please talk to Rob Rainey. Please talk to the building department.
Great, thank you. Paul Flanagan.
Hi, thank you. Thank you all for the time you're putting into trying to resolve this issue. I just have a brief comment. I found it somewhat unbelievable that 8 of you have agreed to follow a different set of operating rules, and then one doesn't. I just think that all of you should be following the same rules one way or the other. Stacy, you had mentioned that people can go to the media and weaponize info. I just think it's wrong to have one person be able to do that and then the others not basically agree to not talk to the media. I just find that very inconsistent and disturbing. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. Thanks for hanging in here a little past our end time. Just want to share my final slide here. Reminder, bi-weekly meetings, we're going to stick with this. We're going to have this data subgroup meeting this Friday at 10 a.m. to develop questions about legal, that people have about legal questions. And just to explain why we are doing this Friday, it's because the town attorney is going to be away next week. So if we want him, we got to get him this week. So that's why we're rushing into action. So 10 a.m. So we will get that agenda out to you all ASAP. And for the data subgroup, but anyone from the group, if you want to come to this data subgroup meeting, feel free. And of course, it's also open to the public. Our next full meeting is Tuesday, November 8th. My sense is we're going to be talking about the answers to the legal questions. So we've already confirmed that the legal team will be able to try and present. And then we're going to be working with Jeffrey at Granicus to try and put together an initial overview of policy levers that might be available. Like, what are the things that, what are the types of clauses or components of a policy that you might put into place, drawing from, all of the different levers available out there. So, and an initial just brainstorm on that topic. Again, feel free to reach out to Semanish or myself with any questions. We will post the slides from tonight and the revised final approved ground rules on the website. And we will get a meeting summary in draft out to you next week. So with that, I wish you all a very good night, and I'll see you again soon.
Good night, Stacy.